the Indonesian Financial Service Authority, or we call it sometimes, OJK, I would like to thank the Organization for Economic Cooperation and Development, or OECD, for hosting the G20 side event together with OJK this afternoon. I treasure the collaboration and friendship we have built over these past years and look forward to another deepening collaboration, especially in the emerging issues such as green economy, financial inclusion, and also customer protection. For me, it is great joy to see you all in person here in Bali after a few years of lockdown. I finally can welcome you to this beautiful island, Bali. We call it also the island of God. Yeah. That Bali has so many unique culture and a precious value that inherited from the ancestor, which is implemented by Balinese people from generation to generation. As we build back together and stronger from the pandemic that has devastated impact to our economy and society, such as harmony and collaboration are more important than ever. And we can learn from the Balinese philosophy, which teaches us to live in harmony with nature and other people, as they call it, Trihita Karana. The harmony among the three elements, the divine, people, and nature, has to be maintained to achieve the prosperity of the Balinese people here. The implementation of the philosophy can be seen in the harmony of life between Balinese people that follow Hindu Dharma and other religions such as Muslim, Christian, and also Confucian. After all, Bali managed to preserve its original tradition for the 1,000 years and still celebrates its cultures in diversity until now. Yeah. Balinese tradition and culture are very interesting because they influence each other to produce a unique development of every kind of art in Bali, such as music, drama, and dance, which are also part of religious ceremony in Bali. And then you can watch the dance performance here, shadow puppet, and drama, and also learn about stories that are interpreted by music, dance, and also custom. Bali is also home of the exotic ancient temple, an iconic landscape, with several of them being the island's most iconic landmarks. The temple will give you a different experience and give you a taste of island, fascinating religious belief, and also dedication to the Hindu god. And also, you cannot visit Bali without infamous rice paddies and also volcano, which is by far the most splendid here in Bali. Excellencies, honorable guests and distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, as the Balinese life of philosophy, the implementation of the corporate governance needs a harmony between shareholders, board, and committee, and also other stakeholders. The disharmony between them will lead to the weak of the implementation of corporate governance, which contributed to the excessive and imprudent of risk-taking behavior in the financial sector especially, which led to the possible failure of individual, institution, company, and of course will lead to the systemic issues. After the pandemic COVID-19, corporate governance practices have become even more important as financial institutions need to adapt their business model in the fast changing environment, especially with the digitalization, strong competition, sustainable finance. Not only to raise the opportunity, but financial institutions also need to respond the new risk caused by technology development and also the climate change. As we are aware, recently, Basel Committee has released a consultative paper for principle for the effective management and supervision of climate-related financial risks, and also propose prudential treatment of the crypto asset, which is in nature because of the digitalization and also because of the climate. Indeed, we must follow the same business, the same risk, and also the same rule principle to mitigate the risk caused by digitalization. The Corporate Governance Forum we had this afternoon marked an important step in the area of governance as it discussed in the incorporation of issues such as sustainability and digitalization into our revised G20 OECD principle. As an active member of the OECD Corporate Governance Committee, OJK, is also pleased to be part of this policy-making process and hope that revised G20 OECD principle will be finalized soon. As the global economy gradually in the process of recovery from the pandemic, it is important that build back together and stronger. This means we need to ensure that scaring effect is minimized with the implementation of sound corporate governance, which can be essential in defining the role of the board and management within a business to ensure that all decision-making processes are for the best interest of all stakeholders. Besides that, strengthening corporate governance also means getting ready to develop a new source of economic growth to recover from the pandemic COVID-19 and also mitigate the emerging risks. As we have in the same goal to address climate challenges and build a more sustainable future, we must approach environmental, social, governance principles seriously as other business risks and opportunities to achieve sustainable growth going forward. Yeah. As I mentioned before, the implementation of corporate governance is similar to the Trihita Karana principle, which also encompasses to the relationship between divine, people, and nature. Corporate governance reflected the commitment between person and person, or person to the wider community, or people, and also reflected our commitment to achieve sustainable economic growth by addressing climate change and nature. We are aware that the financial landscape and risks we are facing recently are very dynamic and evolving. OJK is also aware that there is no one-size-fits-all approach to corporate governance, which means that this guideline will be a living document, possible to be revised going forward, depending the nature of our business. However, the establishing the fundamental are getting to the business ready to practice sound corporate governance is very, very achievable objective. As the regulator and supervisor of financial services in Indonesia, OJK is highly committed to providing a guideline or relevant directive to strengthen corporate governance framework and standard, in line with the international standard, of course, yeah, including the G20 OECD principle. As an active member of the OECD Corporate Governance Committee, once again, I reiterate that Indonesia will be the role model in the implementation of the finalized G20 OECD standard. And we encourage the G20 member and also OECD member could be able to lead by example to implement the corporate governance principle. In closing, I would like to say that building a strong corporate governance ecosystem is most effective when there is a collective effort involving multiple stakeholders and the board of the company. Yeah. Thus, we have your continuous support and partnership, especially the leader of the large company and also leader of international body to enhance the implementation of corporate governance principle. Yeah. I am confident that we can achieve the desired outcome and goal if we work together. I hope this corporate governance forum will provide a clear and comprehensive input for improving the G20 OECD principle as well as maintaining the competitiveness and generating sustainable growth. Finally, I hope today's discussion will be fruitful and give a huge contribution to support corporate governance practice globally. And again, thanks you, Ibu Sri Mulyani, the General Secretary from the OECD, and also from Japanese Minister, for the joining this event, and hopefully going forward, our collaboration will create, a global standard practice acceptable, in the world. Yeah. Thank you, and have a great discussion. Thank you. Good afternoon.
Thank you, Bapak Wimbo, for the welcome remarks. Excellencies, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, in this opening ceremony, we are very honored to have the presence of the Minister of Finance of Republic of Indonesia. Please welcome Ibu Sri Mulyani Indrawati.
Honorable Bapak Wimbo Santoso, the Chairman of the Board of Commissioner, Financial Sector or Financial Service Authority or OJK Indonesia, my colleague Bapak Matthias Korman, the OECD Secretary General, welcome Pak Matthias. My colleague friends, Mr. Sunichi Suzuki-san, the Minister of Finance from Japan. Also my friends, Mr. Masato Kanda, the Chair of the OECD Corporate Governance Committee, as well as Vice Chairman of Finance for International Affairs Japan. Bapak Erick Thohir, which is represented by Pak Tiko, representing the Minister of State-Owned Enterprises, all dear colleagues, speakers, and honorable guests, moderator. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Om Swastiastu, Namo Buddhaya. Very good afternoon to all of you and welcome to Bali. I would like first to express our gratitude for all of you who come to Bali, especially in person, physically, which is very, very important for the people of Bali as well as the economy of Bali, which is hit hard by the pandemic in the past 2 years. And also all the delegates who come to the G20 meeting as well as this occasion, G20 OECD Corporate Governance Forum. I would like to thank the Secretariat of G20 Presidency, the OECD, as well as OJK, the Financial Service Authority, who jointly with the Ministry of State-Owned Enterprise to co-organize this very important forum. Welcome to Bali. And please don't stay in this very dark room. Outside there is a much pleasant green. So please have your time a little bit to enjoy outside. We are all aware that this COVID-19 is a game changer. The crisis have revealed our weaknesses in corporate governance and also capital market, including the rise of climate change and other environmental, social, and governance risks. Along with the adaptation of the new normal condition due to the pandemic, economic activity and human mobility began to gradually recover. This need to be shared concern that amid the challenges of facing the threat of the COVID-19, which is not yet ended, the economy is slowly to recover and entering a recovery pace and hopefully also establishing a new normal. A sustainable economic development is therefore called for. One way to achieve this is to improve the very basic or the backbone of the corporation, that is improving the corporate governance framework. The idea of sustainable economic development came into existence as a result of two important factors. The first is the irreversible degradation of economic resources and all kind, which is caused by human activity. And the second one is the incompatibility of economic optimization standard with the existing dynamic of resources. Growth and equilibrium have always been trade-off in economic theory. Certainly, this is resonate well with the current situation in which many policymakers, especially on the finance, economy, like Minister of Finance, Central Bank Governor, which is convened today in the G20 meetings, we are facing also with now very complex trade-off between growth and stability. Growth, in this case, and equilibrium is a trade-off. While selecting balance would guarantee economic growth, choosing expansion lead to system instabilities. So for all of us, the answer of this trade-off would be to choose sustainable development. Growth should not at the cost of sustainability, or the other way around, sustainability concern should not at the cost of growth. Since 1987, when Brundtland report providing the idea of this sustainable development, this idea has evolved and has been used more and more frequently. The ability of current generation to meet their needs should not or without compromising the capacity of future generation to meet their own requirement, which is described in that report back in 1987. Seems like long time ago, but still resonate very, very strongly with today. In 1992, in Rio de Janeiro, Earth Summit, producing action plan which demonstrate how the corporate environment was perceived to be involved in safeguarding the condition that evolved as a result of this new paradigm. Following that summit, there was a period of time when businesses and environment began to interact differently. And it was during this time that the environmental issue had to be internalized and made as a key component of corporate governance. In order to be able to generate long-term value, businesses need to be function in a complicated global context, also have to be continuously looking for competitive advantage. Despite the fact that the idea of corporate social responsibility, or CSR, has been there since the 18th centuries, it appears that its connection to sustainable development is more recent. CSR refers to voluntary commitment by businesses to satisfy the expectation of their employees, customers, and also the environment and local communities, as well as to support education and health targeting growth. They also lead to the long-term financial success and sustainable corporate development. The idea of corporate social responsibility and sustainable development seems to be no difference. The two ideas are applied to social and environmental problems. Companies that practice social responsibility business practice are very mindful of the needs and interests of all stakeholders, in addition to their objective to maximize profit and gratifying shareholder. In addition, environment, social, and governance, ESG standard, which is mentioned earlier by Pak Wimbo, and socially responsible investment, socially responsible investment. The abbreviation, unfortunately, is SRI. It's my name, actually, Sri. Socially responsible investment, SRR, are principles drawn from the CSR, and they appear to be relevant, similar at first glance. The ESG, in this case, represent the action performed in this regard and can be seen as a tool for identifying excellent management practices, where the social responsible investment, or SRI, is investing method that reflect the value and belief that indicate the exclusion of financial asset in the portfolio based on ethical and moral standard. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, let us look at the role of capital market in sustainability development. Capital market is one of the components of the financial market beside the money market, the foreign exchange market, and the insurance market. I believe that many of us have understood the mechanism of the financial market and its vital role in allocating limited financial resources with a central problem of every economy: how they can create an intermediary function in the most efficient way. It can intermediate the savers and the investor, as well as channeling funds to firms that can use those resources productively. Capital markets are essential for financing the economy. The capital market enable the mobilization of funds from provider, that is household, insurance, pension funds, to their client. The supplier are investors that want to invest their money as effectively as possible as they can, as well as within the risk and potential reward that is already accepted. The contribution that effective capital market makers to generate economic growth has been the subject of protracted discussion among economists. 5 functions of the capital market that promote economic growth, including facilitating liquidity, aiding risk reduction, monitoring managerial behavior, and processing information. This function of the capital market in promoting sustainability then can be linked to first, how the capital market could mobilize saving and raising capital and directing it toward project that is in line with the ESG principle. Second one, how capital market can altering corporate vision by incorporating ESG criteria within their best management practices, by limiting their access to finance for those which is violating the ESG. And the third, capital market can influence good corporate governance practice that promote sustainable development through the ownership mechanism. But in reality, despite the fact that financial market has already adopting ESG factor into account, there does not appear to have been a dramatic movement in favor of enterprise that is more sustainable. So, in reality, this is still insignificant. And that's why this forum within the G20 meeting, we would like to continue promoting this movement and corporate governance, especially in order to encourage more ESG consistent investment. For all of us, climate change, which is already providing a systemic risk and also becoming more and more obvious, it can also threaten the stability of financial system. So, the tasks that need to be taken seriously by all stakeholders is how we are going to adopt comprehensive policy that we can use all the tools, both monetary and financial instruments, in order for us to be able to recognize and taking into account more explicitly the climate change risk within the decision of the investment, both for the investors as well as the owners of the money, that is the saver. One of the most important instruments which is developed within this context is the global green bond. It's not only global, but also some countries already issuing within their own domestic market. And if it is Islamic based, we call it the green sukuk. Capital market, in this case, can become one of the most important institutions to facilitate this kind of instrument, which is financing climate-friendly project. Of course, the integrity of this climate-friendly project in terms of the verification as well as transparency is going to be very critical. Government of Indonesia is also among the government who actively issue, or in this case, designing the green bond as one of the instruments to achieve our sustainable goals, including our commitment to the climate change. The Indonesian government since 2018 has issued $4.8 billion on the green bonds, including in the form of Syariah-based or Sukuk. We understand that issuing this kind of bond will require more compliance on the reporting as well as maintaining the standard of the green of the project which underlying this issuance of the bonds. So basically, the cost is much higher to comply. But as I mentioned earlier, the market has not efficiently and fairly putting the right price on this kind of instrument because the market doesn't differentiate between green and non-green bonds. Another thing that Indonesia also trying to introduce within the capital market is issuing the sustainable development bonds at the international market. Last year, 2021, we issued 500 million euro, and this has become first nation in Southeast Asia with the lowest ever interest rate. When you talk about lowest ever interest rate, today this is becoming very, very rare because the trend of the interest rate, which is going to be increased, will definitely change the risk as well as the appetite. Ladies and gentlemen, we fully understand that our work to promote as well as to adopt ESG within the corporate governance is still far from done, especially because our focus today is more on how we recover from pandemic, how we have to deal with increasing risk coming from global political tension, which creating instability, increasing supply disruption, which then pressuring inflation very, very high. And that's in response is going to create a very tight monetary policy or policy framework that will potentially affect the risk appetite. But we have to continue make our progress and our collective consciousness to continue also designing our recovery process as well as when we are dealing with current dynamic challenging tasks, it doesn't have to be at the cost of potential climate change threat or sustainability concern. I would like to express my highest appreciation for all organizations who jointly today in hosting and organizing this event. This is to show that even under a very difficult circumstances, whether this is in the form of energy crisis, whether this is in the form of food crisis, or even geopolitical tension, we should continue discuss as well as collaborate and cooperate to continue strengthen our partnership and also to strengthen the cooperation of various stakeholders that can adopt and increasingly adopt and practicing the good corporate governance based on environmental, social, and good governance. I wish you all to have a fruitful discussion and very productive one so that the result of this event can also provide a positive contribution for these G20 meetings as well as beyond. Thank you again, and don't forget to just step out and look at the sunshine so that we all can enjoy Bali. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ibu Sri Mulyani, for the very fruitful remarks. Without due respect, we understand Ibu will need to move to her next confirmed agenda. So Ibu Sri Mulyani, right after this, will need to leave the hall for the following agenda. Can we once again give a round of applause to Ibu Sri Mulyani for providing the opening remarks in our opening ceremony. Excellencies, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, for the next opening remarks, kindly be invited Secretary General of OECD, Mr. Matthias Cormann.
Dear Minister Sri Mulyani, Minister Suzuki, Chair Santoso, Chair Kanda, ministers, distinguished guests, friends all. A very warm thank you, first of all, to the Indonesian G20 presidency and to the Indonesian Financial Services Authority for your leadership in hosting today's G20 OECD Corporate Governance Forum and in so strongly supporting the review of the G20 OECD corporate governance principles. Today's event builds on our strong and long-standing G20 OECD cooperation on corporate governance. Good corporate governance is a key pillar of open, market-based economies and a rules-based international order. It helps to build the necessary environment of trust based on transparency, accountability, and business integrity, which in turn helps foster long-term investment and financial stability. Good corporate governance is a central element then of our shared efforts to secure stronger, fairer, and more sustainable growth. The G20 OECD principles of corporate governance were first issued more than 20 years ago, back in 1999. The leaders' endorsement of those principles in Antalya, Turkey, back in 2015, was a significant milestone in our efforts to boost corporate governance standards globally. In fact, since then, 90% of G20 and OECD members have reformed their company or security laws, or both, to align them with the G20 OECD principles of corporate governance. As a result, these principles are now widely recognized as the leading global standard for corporate governance of listed companies and have also been embraced by the Financial Stability Board and the World Bank. As you know, they cover 6 main areas: ensuring the basis for an effective corporate governance framework, the rights and equitable treatment of shareholders and key ownership functions, institutional investors, stock markets and other intermediaries, the role of stakeholders in corporate governance, disclosure and transparency, and last but not least, the responsibilities of the board. The purpose of the review of these principles is to ensure they remain contemporary and fit for purpose, including by adapting relevant elements to the post-COVID-19 environment, taking into account structural effects of the crisis on capital markets and corporate governance practices. Indeed, corporate governance and capital markets have a key role to play in achieving broader economic and social objectives with respect to financial stability, investor confidence, capital formation, and capital allocation. So let me make a few observations. First, Good corporate governance helps companies to access long-term financing. This is particularly important in today's global markets where international flows of capital enable companies to access financing from a much larger pool of investors. It promotes innovation, productivity, and entrepreneurship and fosters economic dynamism more broadly. Second, good corporate governance provides a framework to protect savers. Ordinary citizens are important investors in capital markets, providing a system for our citizens to share in corporate wealth creation while knowing their rights are protected gives them a more complete set of options for managing their savings and planning for their retirement. Third, good corporate governance supports the sustainability and resilience of corporations and, as a result, the long-term sustainability and resilience of the economy. A sound framework determining the roles and responsibilities of shareholders, boards, and stakeholders concerning sustainability matters is also important to help tackle long-term structural challenges like climate change. Indeed, the private sector has a key role to play when it comes to tackling climate change. Governments won't be able to tackle climate change on their own. Corporate governance frameworks then must be fit for purpose to meet our ambitious climate objectives and other environment, social, and governance risks. So let me briefly touch on some of the weaknesses in corporate governance and capital markets that were exposed and exacerbated by the COVID-19 pandemic. One clear weakness has been the management of risks, including insufficient resilience of companies to unanticipated crises. The pandemic also shed light on major shifts in capital markets, including the declining number of listed companies and the lower number of innovative growth companies accessing our stock markets. Since 2005, over 30,000 companies have delisted from markets globally, which is equivalent to losing 75% of all listed companies today. This means fewer companies were able to access capital markets to help them navigate the crisis. Corporate governance frameworks must also account for changes in corporate ownership. This includes the dominance of company group structures, growing state ownership, and the reconcentration of ownership in the hands of large institutional investors. Today, the top 10 investors hold the majority of the capital in almost all listed companies around the world. These trends have important implications for corporate governance. For example, as the role of institutional investors in markets has grown, so has the call for them to become more engaged in the corporate governance of the companies they invest in. This has led to an increase in the development of stewardship codes globally aimed at encouraging investor engagement. Similarly, with the growth of large company groups, jurisdictions are increasingly focusing on regulation and disclosure requirements for complicated group structures to ensure that the rights of minority shareholders are appropriately protected. A growing number of investors now consider climate risks when making their investment and voting decisions. This includes the disclosure of climate-related information, the duties of boards, and the rights and incentives of shareholders. The OECD's report on climate change and corporate governance, launched during our Ministerial Council meeting last month, finds that climate change is already considered a financially material risk for listed companies representing 2/3 of global market capitalization. Sustainability disclosure will be essential for investors to better understand the risks they face and to efficiently allocate capital to the companies that may be better able to thrive in a low-carbon environment. With shareholder accountability becoming a driving force for changing business practices, company boards clearly need to take account of the interests of all stakeholders. We will need consistent, comparable, and reliable disclosure standards on sustainability information. While this helps strengthen the balance sheets of viable corporations, it will also support the emergence of new and innovative businesses needed to support the green and digital transformations of our economies. In closing, I finish where I started. Good corporate governance is a key pillar of open market-based economies and a rules-based international order. It will play a key role in supporting companies navigate the transition to a low-carbon economy, and I warmly welcome the progress made under Indonesia's G20 presidency, working together to update the principles for completion under India's G20 presidency next year. I look forward to continue our work together through this review to strengthen corporate governance and to strengthen corporate sector resilience and to help build a more sustainable, resilient and inclusive future. And I thank you for the opportunity to say a few words, and I wish you positive and productive deliberations today. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Corman, for the opening remarks. Now, for the last opening remarks in this opening ceremony, we would like to invite Minister of Finance of Japan, Mr. Shunichi Suzuki.
Minister Sri Mulyani, Secretary General Keuangan, distinguished participants, thank you for the opportunity to give opening remarks today at the Corporate Governance Forum co-hosted by the G20 Presidency and the OECD. I also appreciate the warm hospitality extended by the people of Indonesia. The economic and social environment surrounding companies is undergoing rapid changes, such as increased interest in climate change and sustainability, the impact of the COVID-19 pandemic, and the historic transformation of society due to digitalization. In this context, and under G20 leaders' instruction, the OECD Corporate Governance Committee is currently reviewing the G20 OECD principle of corporate governance, which form the single international standard endorsed by G20 leaders. The objective of the review is to dramatically improve this international standard for the policymakers, regulators, investors, and companies to adapt to such transformational changes and effectively respond to the associated new challenges and risks. The committee is chaired by Mr. Masato Kanda, Japan's Vice Minister of Finance for International Affairs. As a member of both the G20 and OECD, Japan intends to make active contribution to the review. As we look back on the history of corporate governance reform in Japan, the reform started at about the same time as the previous revision process of the OECD principles. Namely, Japan's Steward Code and Corporate Governance Code were developed in 2014 and 2015, respectively. They both aimed for sustainable growth of companies and enhancement of corporate value over the long term. Various corporate sector reforms have been advanced starting with these codes. Most recently, Japan's corporate governance code was revised in June last year. The revision was aimed at deepening corporate governance through dialogue between companies and investors. The three pillars of the revision were: first, strengthening the functioning of the board of directors; second, ensuring diversity in the core of a company's human resources; and third, enhancing sustainability disclosure. Furthermore, I believe that the viewpoint of the ongoing review of the G20 OECD principles have something in common with the new form of capitalism and economic policy advocated by Japan's current Kishida cabinet. The new form of capitalism is to upgrade a capitalist economy and make it stronger and more sustainable. We recognize that this is broadly in line with the motivations of the current review of the principles of corporate governance, which aims to enhance long-term corporate value by strengthening the sustainability and resilience of corporate activities. For example, one of the major pillars of the new form of capitalism is investment in human resources. Last month, the government released Grand Design and Action Plan for New Form of Capitalism. It calls for the disclosure of non-financial information such as policies for human resource development and working environment, as well as indicators and targets to express these policies. The aim of the enhanced disclosure is to promote a change in the mindset of companies toward seeing their efforts on human capital as investment rather than expenses. This resonates with one of the objectives of the review of the G20 OECD principles, that is taking into account the interests of a wide range of stakeholders, for example, by improving employee skills and the working environment. The disclosure will contribute to the country's better performance and success in the long run. Thus, the government of Japan will promote economic policies that are also in line with the G20 OECD principles. Next, I would like to mention the importance of Asia for the effectiveness of the G20 OECD principles. Reflecting strong economic performance in recent years, Asian capital markets have increased their presence around the world. According to an OECD analysis, more than half of all publicly traded companies in the world are listed on Asian stock exchanges as of the beginning of 2021. The market capitalization of these companies represents 32% of the market capitalization of all publicly traded companies worldwide. As we revise the G20 OECD principles, it is essential to sincerely listen to the opinions of companies, market participants, and authorities in Asian countries, which are the engine of global economic growth. Japan financially supports the outreach activities of the OECD, particularly in Asia, with significant input from stakeholders in Asia and other regions. We expect that the revised G20 OECD principle will contribute to further development of global capital markets and the establishment corporate governance frameworks. Finally, I hope that this forum will provide useful ideas and deep insight for the ongoing review of the G20 OECD principles of corporate governance and contribute to the development of a corporate governance framework that promotes sustainable and resilient corporate activities in countries around the world. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you, Minister Suzuki, for the remarks. Excellencies, so that was the opening ceremony of G20 OECD Corporate Governance Forum. And for now, we are going to continue with the update on the review of the G20 OECD Principles of Corporate Governance. And to present this, kindly be invited to the stage Chair of OECD Corporate Governance Committee, Mr. Masato Kanda.
Thank you very much. Distinguished colleagues, wonderful guests, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure to join you today for this forum. I very much appreciate the Indonesian authorities and the OECD Secretariat for their great efforts to make this possible. And I'm particularly grateful to have this opportunity to inform you of the progress we are making in updating the G20 OECD principles of corporate governance. The review started in November 2021 following G20 leaders' support for the review at the Rome summit in October, and our aim is to obtain the G20's endorsement of the revised G20 OECD principles next year. The review is managed by the OECD Corporate Governance Committee, in which all OECD, all G20, and all SSP member participants. And today, I'd like to focus on three aspects. First, and very briefly, the role and objectives of the Corporate Governance Committee. Second, the G20 OECD principles of the corporate governance and how they contribute to shared strategic priorities of the OECD and the G20. And finally, main dish is the progress of the review of the principles to date. So, yes, this slide gives you a brief overview of the Corporate Governance Committee. As this global standard setter in the field of corporate governance, its objective is to contribute to economic efficiency, sustainable growth, and financial stability by improving corporate governance policies and supporting good corporate practices. This covers both listed companies and state-owned enterprises, which is particularly relevant for the final session of our forum today. I wish to underline here that all G20 and all FSP members participate actively, very actively in the committee and contribute as much as OECD members to our work. A priority of the committee is to ensure the widespread implementation of the G20 OECD principles of corporate governance. Endorsement of the principles by G20 leaders in 2015 as the main international standard for corporate governance has significantly increased their global importance and influence. The role of the principles to help policymakers to evaluate and improve the legal, regulatory, and institutional framework for corporate governance. As you can see in this slide, they have six pillars. The principles have been endorsed by the Financial Stability Board as one of its key standards, and they are used by the World Bank for national assessment as well. 53 jurisdictions have adhered to the principles, including all G20 and all FSB members. The principles have 3 strategic objectives, which I will elaborate on further. To promote access to finance, innovation, and entrepreneurship, to provide a framework to protect savers, and to support the corporate sector sustainability and resilience. The principles provide a corporate governance framework that gives market participants the tools and incentives to ensure companies can access finance from capital markets. Capital markets play an essential role in mobilizing savings to finance large established companies and new and innovative firms. During the financial and COVID crisis, equity market provided companies with substantial and much-needed capital. In 2020 and 2021, non-financial corporation raised record amount totaling almost $2 trillion in new capital. Capital markets have undergone important changes in most advanced markets. The number of listed companies has declined. The exception is in Asia, which now hosts half of all listed companies in the world and half of the most dynamic markets for initial public offerings. The principles focus on publicly traded companies and provide a framework to foster dynamic market and investment while protecting savers. With over 40,000 listed companies with a combined market value of $105 trillion, public equity markets are the largest assets available to households to participate in corporate wealth creation. Institutional investors are the largest owners, and they invest a large share of their portfolios in foreign markets. This makes sound corporate governance policies essential to protect savers across borders. The principles also play a key role in supporting sustainability and resilience in the corporate sector. Climate change is a significant financial material risk for listed companies, representing 2/3 of global market capitalization. In addition, the corporate sector's indebtedness has increased significantly, doubling since 2005. A good corporate governance framework improves corporations' access to market-based financing, in particular public equity. Better access to equity means stronger corporate balance sheets. This enables new and innovative business to support the green and digital transition, both essential for increasing long-term resilience. This slide highlights the 10 priority areas the committee has identified for the review. And these areas support a number of OECD and G20 strategic priorities, including promoting a resilient post-COVID recovery, managing the climate transition, and supporting the digital transformation. Last month, the committee concluded a first in-depth discussion of possible revisions to address all 10 of these priority areas. In my remaining remarks, I'd like to give you some of the key takeaways from these discussions. First, the draft proposes important revisions to the introductory framework to the principles, in particular to better reflect their 3 overarching objectives, which I have just described. Both G20 and OECD countries have expressed strong support for this revised introduction and the overall direction of the revisions. Important revisions are also proposed to the first chapter of the principles on the legal and institutional framework for corporate governance, which include revision to encourage appropriate supervisory autonomy and capacity, a new recommendation supporting the use of digital technologies to strengthen supervision and enforcement of the corporate governance framework, and a new recommendation on the oversight of company groups. Other revisions are proposed to address the complexity of company group structures and over the disclosure of group structures and related party transactions. The biggest change proposed in the revision is a new chapter on sustainability and resilience. So we are introducing the new chapter focusing on sustainability and resilience. This is quite new. This chapter brings together guidance on corporate governance and sustainability issues from a cross-cutting perspective, and it addresses the roles of corporate disclosures, both shareholders and stakeholders. Countries generally expressed support for the increased focus on sustainability, not only in the new chapter, but also with respect to revisions to existing recommendations in other chapters of the principles relevant for sustainability. These revisions notably address board duties, risk management, and the role of ESG assurance providers. The revisions also address the important role of institutional investors and stewardship, including the growing use of stewardship codes as a tool to support shareholder engagement and the need to address the increasing use of ESG indices, data, and rating by institutional investors and their rise as indirect engagement tools for institutional investors. Another important topic for the review is the growing use of and related opportunities and risks of digital technologies, and the need to take account of these evolutions both in supervisory practices as well as regulatory frameworks. New recommendations underline the importance of a technology-neutral approach that doesn't impair innovation, while also promoting emerging good practices with respect to the conduct of the virtual and hybrid shareholder meetings. Concerning board responsibilities and duties, revisions include new recommendations on diversity and growing use of board committees. There is also a new emphasis on risk management, including crisis management, and a key new element of the principles guidance on executive remuneration addresses the disclosure of sustainability indicators used in determining executives' pay. Finally, the principles propose a new standalone recommendation to address the increasing importance of corporate debt and bondholders in market, their rights and their impacts on corporate governance frameworks. Secretary General Keuangan provided the second progress report of the revision to G20 Finance Ministerial meeting this week, outlining the progress achieved since his first report in February. I'd like to encourage you to consult this report for more information on the revisions under consideration. Public visibility of the review will further increase during the September and October, when we will be holding consultations with a range of stakeholder organizations, policy committees, and the public. So public consultation will begin in September. As noted, our aim is to present the revised principle of G20 OECD principles endorsement in 2023. Next year is the target. So, distinguished ladies and gentlemen, sound corporate governance and well-functioning capital markets will influence the strength and quality of the recovery from the COVID crisis and the resilience of the corporate sector to future shocks. More importantly, invigorate and innovate market economy for more sustainable and strong one. I therefore look forward to the discussion today to inform our work on revising the the G20 OECD principles of corporate governance, I believe our partnership will continue to play an important role in achieving our shared objectives for years to come. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Mr. Masato Kanda-san. Please remain on stage. Mr. Kanda-san, please remain on stage because we would like to take this opportunity for a group photo with our dignitaries. So kindly join Mr. Kanda on the stage for a group photo. Bapak Wimbo Santoso, Bapak Kartika Wiryo Atmojo, Bapak Mardiasmo, Mr. Yoshiki Takeuchi, Mr. Carmine Dinoya, my apology for pronouncing your name not in the right way. Mr. Carmine Dinoya. So once again, we are taking this opportunity for the togetherness, the moment of togetherness in the event of G20 OECD Corporate Governance Forum. So the positions are right. Bapak Mardiasmo, kindly remove your mask if you don't mind for this session. Okay, photographers all ready. On the count of 3, please show your best smile. 1, 2, 3. Can we give a round of applause for our gentlemen on stage for this moment of togetherness in this opening session of G20 OECD Corporate Governance Forum. And after this, before we move on to the main topic, we are going to invite you for a 15-minute break. Refreshments are served in the next hall. Please return here before 15 minutes so you can bring your coffee and tea refreshments to this hall. There's no break. So once again, this is a very short break, 5 minutes break, because we also need to arrange the stage for our panel discussion. So once again, I would like to revise the duration of the break. It's 5 minutes, a very short break, while the team is preparing the logistics on stage and all the speakers and moderator for the first session is preparing for this session. Thank you. Distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, once again, please be reminded our first session will start shortly. So kindly take your seats. And I would like to kindly remind you to please put your mobile phones into silent mode so we can put our full focus on the discussion. Thank you very much for your kind cooperation. Ladies and gentlemen, now we would like to start our session. It is time to start the main discussion on G20 OECD corporate governance principles. And as mentioned in the beginning, the discussion will be divided into 3 sessions. For the first session, the discussion will be on sound corporate governance and well-functioning capital markets for a stronger post-COVID-19 recovery. Speakers of this session are Mr. Andy Bokal, Undersecretary for International Affairs from the U.S. Treasury, Mr. Alessandro Rivera, Director General of the Italian Treasury, Mrs. Justini Septiana, Deputy Commissioner of Capital Market Supervision of OJK Indonesia. To lead the discussion, we have Mr. Carmine Di Noia, Director for Financial and Enterprise Affairs of OECD. Please join me. Once again, ladies and gentlemen, may we have your kind attention. Bapak, Ibu, boleh mohon perhatiannya, kita akan mulai segera sesi pertama ini. Once again, kindly take your seats and please join me in welcoming the speakers and moderator of the first session.
Okay, thank you very much, dear participants. You know, the corporate governance of the Corporate Governance Forum is not working very effectively. After 80 minutes, we are 40 minutes late. So we will try to be short and effective, but obviously I would like to thank first Minister Sri Mulyani, Minister Suzuki, Secretary General Corman and Chair Santoso for their remarks, and Vice Minister Kanda for the presentation of the review of the principles. We are now moving to the first session, as was mentioned, on sound corporate governance. Please, can I have your attention? And well-functioning capital markets for a stronger post-COVID-19 recovery. Now, as Mr. Corman, Secretary General, mentioned in his remarks, please, good corporate governance and well-functioning capital markets promote innovation, productivity, good corporate governance and productivity entrepreneurship while supporting the sustainability and resilience of corporations. So, and as a result, the sustainability and resilience of the broader economy. This will be the topic of this panel, but also of the second and the third. So we're lucky and honored I will be sure to have a number of very distinguished panelists with us here today to discuss this important issue. And so, without even an introduction, to save also time, I will give, the floor immediately for 5 minutes initial remarks. I will start with Andy Bokal, Undersecretary for International Affairs of the U.S. Treasury. So, Andy, the floor is yours, and applause for Andy, please.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Very pleased to be here to voice my support for the important work that the OECD's Committee on Corporate Governance does as the internationally recognized standard-setting body for effective corporate governance. Also pleased that my friend Masato Kanda is the chair of the committee. I'm very confident we'll end up with a very sound result. At their most basic level, the principles of corporate governance aim to address the problems that can stem from the fact that the people running publicly listed companies are not the people who own the company. This is a classical principal-agent problem, well understood by economists, lawyers, policymakers for many years. Sound corporate governance frameworks aim to properly align incentives and promote transparency to encourage fair markets and the efficient allocation of capital. As a number of our speakers have already mentioned, the COVID episode pandemic of the last several years has identified a number of weaknesses in corporate governance frameworks. We can take steps to strengthen the resilience of the recovery from COVID in a number of ways. These include promoting capital formation that is essential to strong economic growth and job creation, supporting robust public equity markets that match savers with companies in need of capital, and strengthening the resilience, credibility, and transparency of markets. We all know how important these key functions are to a strong post-COVID recovery. The committee's work to update the principles from 2015 is warranted given a number of factors. The first is the increased relevance of sustainability considerations. Investors are demanding sustainability-related information to inform their decision-making. In particular, climate-related risks are increasingly relevant to companies and stakeholders. I was struck by the data that Kanda-san showed us related to climate risks being material for so many firms around the world. Second, there's an uptick in digital technology use by corporations. This has implications not only for investor engagement, but also, of course, for digital security and cybersecurity. And third, there's a remarkable decline in the number of high-growth companies that go public. This development points to a need to improve the conditions for companies' access to capital from public markets while promoting investor protection. During this review, it is critical that we maintain the credibility, relevance, and durability of the corporate governance principles. How can we do that? Well, first, it is clear we need to adapt the principles to emerging issues, including sustainability considerations. In doing so, we must keep in mind that the key function of corporate governance is to address this principal-agent problem that I mentioned earlier. Our review of the principles should not redefine the functions of corporate governance frameworks or undermine the credibility and longevity of the principles. Second, jurisdictions will use different combinations of policies to promote sound corporate governance. The principles should encompass the range of approaches in use and promote similar outcomes so that they provide a robust reference point for a range of jurisdictions and approaches. As Mr. Santoso said earlier, there's not a one-size-fits-all strategy here. Third, we need to balance the demands placed on publicly listed firms against the need to encourage more listings and more capital formation. Better access to equity markets can help strengthen the balance sheets of viable corporations and provides opportunities for investors to share in the returns on capital. In conclusion, we at Treasury commend the committee's work so that the principles continue to be a robust reference points for policymakers around the world. We look forward to continuing the conversation and finalizing the revisions to the principles in the next year. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Andy, for your words and your also support for the principles and the revision in a wise way. And now the word to Alessandro Rivera, Director General of the Treasury from Italy.
Thank you, Carmine, and it is also my pleasure to be here in this event today. Let me also thank you for inviting me and thank all those that have worked on organizing this event. I also thank the OECD for all the work that it is carrying on this review of the principles of governing of the corporate governance. This initiative started with the support of the G20 and the Italian presidency in 2021. This one is the third review after the ones that took place in 2004 and 2015. As Corman said, as Matthias Corman said in his opening remarks, it is key to keep the principles updated and adjust them to the changes in economy and society worldwide. including the consequences of COVID-19 and some other structural developments in capital markets and corporate governance practices. When we supported the review in the G20, we were focused on COVID-19. Meanwhile, new significant risks and uncertainties have materialized, and this certainly reinforces the call for adjustments, also in respect of the rules that underpin capital markets. And here, looking at the work program, what comes immediately to my mind is the important work stream on risk management, addressed also by Keuangan in his opening remarks. Among the structural developments that need to be duly considered in the context of this review, I would certainly first recall the environmental and social sustainability. The principles of corporate social responsibility, long-term value creation, and sustainable success are at this point widely recognized. Still, the difficult job is that of translating those principles into increasingly effective rules for companies. Minister Sri Mulyani pointed out that the pace there is still unsatisfactory. Effective means that while we move the focus from the creation of value to the long-term business sustainability, we should ensure that the new rules can generate a virtuous mechanism so that integrating the green and social dimension into the business model, the organization and the governance of the company allows the company themselves becoming more attractive for new capital. When looking at the areas identified in the program for the review of the principles, I would indicate these priorities: strengthening the management of the ESG risks and also addressing the growth of digital technology, renewing attention to the role, composition, and incentives of the board members and management to improve the capability to adapt companies' strategies to a rapidly changing environment, and facilitating access to equity markets for viable companies that is key for the post-COVID recovery and to face the consequences of the ongoing crisis, the military aggression on Ukraine. And here, just let me conclude by mentioning some important aspects of this last work stream I underlined, the facilitating access to equity markets. We know that corporate governance is key in making capital markets more effective in performing the function of efficiently allocating capital. We understand, and we have heard it still today, and we have read it in the reports prepared by the OECD, that there are some concerning developments in the reduction of the number of listed companies, number of companies that access public markets, the institutional investors concentrating mainly on the largest corporations, and also the ownership concentration of listed companies. These, of course, may undermine the capacity of capital markets to perform that function, and this is particularly concerning in the face of the investment needs that we are facing. So it seems to me that we should look into these matters in very concrete ways, also looking, for instance, at the process that leads companies to be listed, especially the small growth companies, and the obstacles that may find in this process, in order to facilitate the access and the permanence on the market for these smaller companies. This, of course, has to be done safeguarding the investor protection, and bear in mind that in the newly listed smaller companies, they trade off between the interest of controlling shareholders to fully exploit the advantages of control, the private benefits of control has to be certainly reconciled with the protection of minority shareholders. Very final point, sustainable growth requires patient capital. institutional investors and their governance play a key role in this respect. So an important work stream that I would also underline here is to better identify, the one aimed at better identify the responsibility in decision making, and in that of improving the institutional investors' engagement with the companies. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandro, and reminding also that corporate governance, our object is not an end in itself, but is a means also to better access capital markets, and in the end create jobs and growth, which is what we care in the end, and also on the other point. So I give the floor to Ms. Giustini Septiana for Foreign Friends Tini, and the Deputy Commissioner of Capital Market Supervision of the OJK from Indonesia. Tini, the floor is yours.
Thank you for the opportunity. Thank you, Mr. Carmine. Well, first of all, of course, we are happy because Indonesian capital market grows rapidly, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic. We also happy recently some new companies joining capital market are growth companies. OJK has strategic to improve capital market in terms of the both supply side and demand side, and also investor protection into 4 pillars, namely regulation and policies, and then authorization, and then supervision and enforcement. For regulation and policies, from the policy making aspect, several regulation and policies have been taken by OJK to reach the goal of improvement on supply side and demand side. For example, OJK has issued a regulation for a book building, e-book building, and e-IPO, and then e-registration and e-reporting. Also, regulation for securities crowdfunding, and then securities for green bond and suku. OJK also provides relaxation of fundraising requirement, particularly during the COVID-19 pandemic. And then some policies such as OJK make easy for SMEs and startup companies to obtain funds via issuing shares, debt securities, and Sharia securities. And also OJK provide incentive for 25% of the predetermined rate of fee levy on the registration statement in the context of a green bonds public offering. And pillar 2, about authorization, OJK issued policies and developed system that creates a more effective, efficient, and accountable related to authorization process. For example, to streamline the IPO process, internally OJK improve internal SOP and also service level agreement SLA. And for market players, intermediaries are allowed to exercise know your client via third party which are reliable data, or use the third party data which is reliable data. And for pillar 3, supervision, to keep investor trust in capital market, so the investor protection is in place. OJK policies, amongst others, is giving a special notation for company on the secondary market, and then develop of the new economy board on the secondary market, and then also development of a special monitoring board on the secondary market, and also regulators repressive efforts which are done through issue regulation related to disbursement and disbursement fund and investor protection fund. Under the disbursement and this disbursement fund regulation, OJK issued a written order to wrongdoers violating capital market regulation to return the profit received illegally to investors. And also strengthening supervisory and enforcement powers and supervisory action also. So OJK improve supervision on the quality of the transparency and disclosure of public company and all licensed players to ensure that they comply with all regulation and policies. And then OJK find the transparency principles has not been complied by public company and other market players. So OJK will take supervisory action to ensure the disclosure of their reports contain correct and adequate information. Also, OJK has a continuously program for socialization and education. And pillar 4, enforcement. So in this pillar, OJK issued regulation related to the disbursement and disbursement fund and the investor protection fund, and under disbursement fund and disbursement fund regulation, OJK issued writing order the wrong those in violating capital market regulation to return the profit received illegally to investors. That's
Thank you, Tini. It's very interesting. Maybe a follow-up question, because it's interesting for many of you. We just released a report on the Extractado's corporate finance in Asia and the COVID-19 crisis. We released a couple of weeks ago in a seminar with the IOSCO. And what's interesting is that with respect to this whole, I would say, background of a structural issue of delistings of companies from the markets, especially in all markets but Asia, but even in Asia, I mean, the number of listed companies in Indonesia has increased in the last 10 years. So maybe also this is a result of what you described, and actually most new companies are growth companies, which is also quite interesting. And so this is a bit different from the trend that we observe in other markets, where again, the number of IPOs is decreasing. You remember also Masato Kanda showed this. So what role, I would say, has OJK played in attracting more companies to the stock market?
Yeah, for the company that the listing, especially for the listing, we have the role for that company that is choosing become a private company, or they try to relisting and become a public company again. With the follow our rule, the rule and regulation and the policies.
Okay, so an active, I would say, role of the regulator, also I guess together with the market players and the others. But this is very important. Andy, maybe I'm a bit running, but I promise that we will try to finish by 3:30. Also because our speakers also have other engagement. You mentioned at the beginning, in a sense, in the revision of the principle, we should be also, let's say, with a wise revision, one size does not fit all, but so how can we adjust the G20 OECD principle to incorporate the sustainability considerations, which is a key issue, in a way that, as also Alessandro mentioned, will support really a recovery from the COVID-19 pandemic?
Yeah, this is an important question. I think the principles can support a strong recovery by promoting clarity with respect to governance processes, controls, procedures that entities use to inform investors and shareholders, and monitoring and managing sustainability risks and opportunities. A couple examples. The principles could provide clarity on the roles, responsibilities, and interest of boards, shareholders, and stakeholders related to the management and disclosure of climate-related risks. Another example, the principles could provide guidance on how to protect the rights of shareholders in instances when firms set sustainability targets or objectives. There's also a somewhat of a presentational question that's out there. If I understood Kanda-san correctly, the idea is to have a standalone chapter on sustainability. That's one approach. Another approach is to build sustainability considerations throughout the principles. So we should think about which will be more effective in allowing jurisdictions to use the principles effectively to build in sustainability issues across the range of issues. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you also for this important consideration. Let's say, I always say that it's true that one size does not fit all, but corporate governance is also, I would say, not one size, but fits for all, because it's always true that we need good corporate governance for everyone. Alessandro, Italy also is interesting because it's a sort of advantage on the G20 OECD partnership. You chaired the ministerial meeting of the OECD in 2022, and Italy served the presidency of G20 last year, and actually will be chairing G7 in 2 years' time after Japan. So what role do you see this partnership playing in impacting the future of corporate governance and our overall capital markets?
Well, yes, during our presidency, we actually exploited largely cooperation with the OECD. We have been engaged with the OECD on a number of work streams and policy areas, including, I would recall, for instance, productivity, digital transformation, but also surely corporate governance. And this is a last step of a long-standing history of strong cooperation with the G20 in this field, as has been recalled. It dates back to 2015 when the principles were first endorsed by the G20. You may remember when it all started. It was in Rome in June 2021. We had an event presenting 2 important publications. And then we came to the decision by the Finance Minister Central Bank Governance in Venice, restated in October, and finally confirmed by the summit in Rome. The launch of the process was certainly well timed. I have already said it, but it's worth repeating. It was a time when there was clearly the perception that investment needs would increase, and that some financial resources could be trapped into less effective forms of investment. So, yeah, it is precisely the core of the function of financial markets, to allocate resources efficiently. And corporate governance certainly is key in achieving these results. What I would underline here is a couple of things. The program goes through 3 different presidencies. We started it. Now we are receiving reports. This is the second one during the Indonesian presidency, and we have been recalled the program that is expected to end next year between the 2nd and 3rd quarter for final approval by the summit at the closing of the Indian presidency. So in the G20 context, the most important deliverables are the outcome of multi-year efforts across presidencies. And it is important here that continuity is ensured, both on the side of the OECD and then, of course, on the side of the G20. The corporate governance principles deal with the functioning of capital markets. This is structurally and truly a global matter. I really think that the G20 remains the most appropriate venue for a meaningful political discussion on this policy matter. This does require a multilateral and coordinated approach, which unfortunately has now become much more difficult. But this does not mean that the efforts do not have to continue. Thank you.
Thank you, Alessandro. Yeah, we imagine that the corporate governance of G20 is not as easy as it was some months ago. Maybe we have the time quickly. Andy, it was mentioned digital, so how can the increased use of digital technologies improve corporate governance? In a minute. Okay.
In a minute, okay. Well, in some contexts, technology can foster greater inclusion of cross-border investors, could improve equity market access for companies. In other contexts, of course, technology could pose barriers for newly listed companies if there are new requirements that are imposed related to technology. So we have to be careful in how we address this. The principles, in my view, should carefully harness the opportunities presented by digital technologies and focus on the outcomes that we want to promote: enhanced investor protection, investor confidence, and transparency. And we should be also mindful that, of course, technology will evolve over the years, so be somewhat flexible in how we present this.
Thank you, Andy. This has been also, I would say, the secret of principles along all these years, and then for the endorsement. Flexible, also so better to adapt in all jurisdictions, at the same time being ambitious, and so to try to have, to move forward. And maybe, Alessandro, you have also important experiences in some important boards of, I would say, companies, but also in the public sector. What you see are the lessons of the COVID crisis concerning the treatment of risks in a corporate governance framework, and do you think are companies sufficiently prepared to tackle them?
Yeah, we have been so effective that we are risk of ending up in advance of.
No, but you don't have to see that we must finish by 6 minutes, okay, and you have one. So he's trying to exploit Italian friendship. You have 1 minute, 90 seconds. 90 seconds, okay. I already mentioned the work stream on risk management. This is key, and I also would underline again that it is important that a large part of this work stream is related to the management of environmental, social, and governance risks. This calls for a number of actions. I would specifically underline as a fundamental success factor the quality of the board. Directors will be more and more called to adopt decisions able to address a wider range of risks and reconcile the management choices with a growing number of interests, while of course ensuring the continuity of the corporation over the long term. Here, the principal agent problem that Andy underlined in his opening remarks more and more calls for addressing a wider range of stakeholders beyond the shareholders, beyond the owners of the company. The board is basically required, in a nutshell, to take the responsibility of the transition. And this leads to a redefinition of the composition, the skills of the board, the organizational structure of the company, and also, I would say, the strategies, so that the green and sustainability dimensions are fully integrated into the industrial plan and the business choices of the company. So addressing risk is not only about prevention and management, but it does deeply affect the corporate strategies for investment and development. Thank you, Alessandro. This is essential, and also, we have, since the beginning, the topic of corporate governance is board and board quality, but even, in the new environment is even more and more important. Tini, maybe for you, and a specific also topic, and we have, again, 1 minute or 2 minutes, and so you see that, corporate governance is working a bit, and you don't need enforcement, public enforcement. So another trend, and also a common feature, actually, of Indonesian and Asian market, but also of some markets that we also know, continental Europe and others, is the strong presence of company groups. And so as a result, OJK has been active in ensuring enough information is available with respect to company group. And by the way, this was also a topic of some OECD, specific work on that, and also thanks to your strong engagement. So what are the main challenges OJK still faces in overseeing company groups?
Thank you.
And you have a challenge of doing this in 90 seconds.
Yeah, as you know that in Indonesia, percentage of ownership controlling shareholders is in listed companies is about 62%. So the challenges is determining who the ultimate beneficial owners of the company is the person who has the ultimate decision-making power is in a company, and how to the control over the company directly or indirectly is exercised also. And then knowing who the ultimate owner of the listed company is very important when finding the of the OJK supervision are related to the cases surrounding disclosure of information, fairness of transaction, and quality in obtaining the same and balanced information. Also equality in the opportunity to contribute in the policy making of the company, and whether the ultimate owner has taken action in the best interest of the company. That's the challenging.
Thank you, Tini. Was great. I see that just to conclude, first of all, Masato Kanda explained that we are in the revision process of the principles, and also this was clear also in the main points, also points of attention from the panel. I really invite you, we will have an Asian roundtable in Vietnam, actually in October, but also we will have a public consultation, as it was mentioned. So I really invite you, from the market to take attention. It's important to have your opinion. You can really contribute to that. So this is the first thing. The second thing, it's important that this was mentioned many times, the capital market and corporate governance framework are really in good shape, as is the slogan of this G20, to recover together and to recover stronger. And the OECD is here to also to support all of you and for better policies, for better lives. And so thank you very much. We were allocated 45 minutes, so we saved 11, so I think we are very good. So a round of applause to the speakers.
Thank you, moderator and speakers, for the first session, especially for being very effective in the time management. Kindly return to the floor. And once again, round of applause for the first session. We now continue our discussion with topic on the role of corporate governance in improving sustainability and resilience in the business sector. To discuss about this topic, we will invite Ms. Alice Carr, Executive Director of Public Policy from the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero, Ms. Gabriela Figueiredo Diaz, the Chair of International Ethics Standard Board for Accountants, and Mr. Marco Aurelio dos Santos Rocha, Secretary for International Economic Affairs from the Ministry of Economic of Brazil. And this session will be led by Ibu Mashita Kristalin, Special Advisor to Minister of Finance for Macroeconomic and Fiscal Policy of Indonesia. Ladies and gentlemen, without further ado, please welcome our speakers and moderator who are already on the stage. Ibu Mashita, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. I believe we still have 45 minutes, so hopefully we can cover 2 rounds of questions if everybody keep in the 3-minute space. Maybe I would like to introduce Ms. Alice Carr. She is the Director of Public Policy of G20, Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero. G20 is working to ensure the global financial system to achieve the net zero. Prior to joining G20, Ms. Alice had a 2-decade career in central banking, most recently leading the BOE, International Strategy and Policy Division. She has a Master in Economics and Finance from Universidad de Navarra and in History from University of Cambridge. Welcome, Ms. Alice. Second is Gabriela Diaz. Gabriela is the Chairwoman of the International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants. Previously, she served as the President of CMVM, which is the Portuguese authority responsible for regulating and supervising the market of financial instruments. In addition, Gabriela has also served as the Vice Chair of the OECD Corporate Governance Committee, a member of the ESMA board and management board, and a member of the iOS CEO board. She holds a master's degree in law from Coimbra, I don't know if I mentioned that correctly, University Law School. Marco Roja is the Secretary of International Economic Affairs within the Brazil Ministry of Economy. His main responsibility include international economic cooperation, including G20 and also the OECD. Prior to joining the ministry, Marco worked 18 years in Brazil Central Bank. He has a PhD in finance from Illinois Urbana-Champaign, like Mr. Mulyani, and a master's degree in economics from FGV in Brazil. So I would give the opportunity to each speakers for beginning remarks, 5 minutes. Alice?
Thanks very much. Thanks for inviting me to join you today. As some of you may know, the Glasgow Financial Alliance for Net Zero was founded in the run-up to COP last year. And we're a slightly funny beast in that we are a voluntary alliance, but actually our members have committed under the UN Race to Zero to meeting certain criteria. So we're kind of voluntary, but with some guide rails. And although we haven't tested this yet, if our members don't stick to their commitments, there is a process for them to depart the alliance. So we've created a sort of voluntary arrangement, but with some guide rails. And what they've committed to, essentially, is to transition their financed emissions, so the real economic activity that they finance, to net zero by 2050 and to achieve 50% decarbonisation by 2030. And so there's a question about why they've chosen to do that. I think it's partly because the business community and the financial sector are now seized of the materiality of climate risk taken together, both the risks and the opportunities. And so the major financial firms that form our alliance have decided to undertake a whole of business transformation that puts them on the right side of net zero transition. I think underpinning that choice is also the fact that they're taking seriously the commitments that governments have made at COP towards net zero transition. So that's definitely been quite influential. So I think what we are trying to do is something a bit similar to the corporate principles that the OECD has developed, which is to provide guide rails to make sure that the firms follow through on their commitments appropriately. And what we've done so far is develop a framework for transition planning, which is a bit like the TCFD, for those of you who know it, but it's for transition planning. And it basically sets out what the firms in our alliance, the more than 500 firms from 45 countries, should do. And we are asking them to, as part of this transition planning framework, to commit to taking this seriously at the board level and CEO level. But then we also go on to explain how they need to cascade that down the business in terms of skills, culture, and also responsibilities, right from the top through to those who are making frontline decisions on financing. We also set out some other guide rails around target setting, the kind of planning activity they need to do, and also on accountability and transparency. So we're asking them to be public about their targets, to report publicly once per year on their progress. So we're doing our best to kind of put some shape around this. We, importantly, and I think this is quite relevant to the principles, we include as a core part of transition planning an engagement strategy. So we're quite specific in the framework, and we say to firms that they must engage both with the households and the corporates that they finance, but also with policymakers, investors, and other stakeholders on their transition planning. And that they must set out what their engagement strategy is and how they're doing against it. We also, and I think this is quite novel, I was quite impressed when I saw it, we've included in the framework that they should align their lobbying and other such activities with net zero. So I think we have had, it's perhaps a kind of, just because we've only got going on this net zero transition, we have had challenges at times that, you know, one part of a major global firm is committed to net zero and the other part is perhaps undertaking lobbying of stakeholders in a way that would sort of rub up against that. But we've asked them in the framework to align their external engagement with their net zero transition commitment. So I was just going to note that I think we're going as far as we can to put shape around this. I think we would welcome support in that, and it may be something that can be built into the review of the corporate principles. We need to ensure that firms disclose in an appropriate way to secure fair markets. So some security regulators we've spoken to have noted that because firms have made these commitments, it does create a need for them to follow through and to provide information so that investors can see whether they're actually doing this earnestly or not. And I was also going to note that we've talked, or some of the previous speakers have talked about capital allocation and the importance of that. And I guess the whole point of net zero transition planning is that it should affect capital allocation through time. So we're asking our firms to engage with the corporates they finance and to explain that those firms will themselves need to transition. And I guess if they don't, through time, global financial firms will have to change the way they allocate finance to them. So I think that it is going to have an important market effect, and I think to the extent that we can include these kinds of long-term transition planning activities and risks in the review of the principles alongside issues around financing already green activities, that could be quite important. Thanks.
Thank you, Alice. Very interesting on the transition planning and also capital allocation for corporation to do the transition. I would like to hear from Gabriela on your insight for this issue.
Thank you very much, and thank you very much for the invitation to be here today. It's a pleasure and it's an honor, and also helps me better understand the clear links between what I'm doing now as Chair of the International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants and what I was doing before as Vice Chair of the Corporate Governance Committee. It's knowing the reality from both sides, and that's where I'd like to start. Because there is a context for what we are discussing here today. The OECD is reviewing the principles, and this is the main context. We are discussing how better corporate governance improves corporation access to finance, how this may help improving sustainability, but we also know that we are discussing this in the context of a trust crisis. The events, financial events, the collapses, the failures of companies over the last decades have fostered a trust crisis. Investors and the community as a whole does not trust that much companies, and this means that companies are having a problem in getting funding from investors and from stakeholders in general. And so we are all working for the same purpose. At AISBA, and just to give you a little bit of a sense of what we are doing, the AISBA, the International Ethics Standards Board for Accountants, develops standards, ethics standards for accountants in preparing and assuring financial information. And one of the main implications of climate change for corporate governance is exactly on corporate disclosure and on the responsibilities of those charged with governance within the companies. And so there is a clear link between what we do and what OECD does, and a common purpose, which makes me think that we should work and could work together for the same purpose. There is an increase of sustainability disclosures importance and requests. Both investors are calling for improved information on sustainability, but regulators are also developing frameworks for this purpose, and this is where we have to locate our discussion. There are also requests for the companies to do the right things between beyond compliance with the law. There is a role for sustainability disclosures in restoring trust, not only because of the matter itself, sustainability, which somehow works for recovering the trust of investors, but also because we are all working, and the OECD will do it with the revision of the principles, on the disclosure of sustainability or sustainability disclosures from company, and we have to do it right from the start and not repeat some failures or some errors from the past in respect to financial information. What we all aim for is to create a framework for corporate reporting or sustainability reporting, which is as robust as financial reporting, but goes beyond that because it includes some different elements which are important to recover trust and therefore to attract capital and support capital allocation decisions from investors. There is a role for ethics here, and this is what we are also concerned at AISBA. Ethics is inherent to all corporate governance aspects and board decisions. It's important to core business decisions and strategies, and ethical and values and ethics help driving profits in the long run, in the long term, while protecting the planet and the people. This is what this is about. Capital markets play a significant role in driving the change, but need to take a different approach and to embrace ethics and sustainability, while at the same time, those charged with governance within the companies, namely boards and audit committees, play a critical role in improving and changing culture. Professional accountants, which are those targeted by the AISBA standards, are bound by the AISBA Code of Ethics, which sets expectations for them to promote an ethical culture and inquire mind and challenge the others within the company with respect to ethical approaches. Ethical standards play a significant role in building corporate values in the public interests and the public trust. So, the AISBA Code of Ethics can play a role here as well. It works for professional accountants, asks or guides their professional behavior, ethical behavior, and auditor independence, and it's relevant for corporate value, plays a role in guiding preparers of financial and sustainability information and corporate reporting. I could say a lot more about the Code of Ethics, but in the lack of time, I'd like to conclude these initial remarks by saying that the OECD principles and AISBA standards pursue similar goals, go in parallel, and can be complementary. The revision of the principles must take sustainability and the changing corporate models and different culture and thinking on board. Corporate reporting and duties of those charged with governance are key to foster this change. And there is the strong basis that the principles, the OECD principles and AISBA standards set for financial information should be replicated for sustainability information. But to be robust, reliable, transparent, and support capital allocation decisions, sustainability information must be prepared and assured in accordance to strong assurance and ethics standards, which is what the AISBA is preparing together with the IAASB, our twin board, that is preparing the sustainability assurance standards. The AISBA standards, the existing ones and the ones that we committed to prepare and that are already recognized as part of the future sustainability reporting infrastructure by the Financial Stability Board, provide the necessary ethical basis that for the revised OECD principles to be effectively implemented and to be activated as important, relevant, key G20 standards. And I'll stop here. Thank you.
Thank you, Gabriela. So on the sustainability disclosure, it's not just about the sustainability, but also we have a role of ethics here. I would like to invite Marco for the remarks.
Thank you very much. Okay. Thank you very much. Good afternoon to all of you. It is a great honor to be here today and participate in this G20 OECD Corporate Governance Forum. So I thank the OECD for the invitation, and I hope I meet the expectations. I start by saying that sustainability and resilience in the business sector are key issues for all G20 economies, and we welcome the decision to review the G20 OECD principles for corporate governance. The revised principles will be certainly a relevant source of guidance to all of us, policymakers, and to improve our corporate governance frameworks with respect to the environment, social issues, and governance risks. I speak here now today through the lens of transparency and disclosure, and I'll use Brazil as an example in the recent reports that were prepared by the OECD last month. And as you may have heard, Brazil is running a thorough reform agenda to improve the business environment that span all the life cycle of enterprises, from easiness of starting a business to facilitating access to financing and to providing adequate incentives to keep companies alive. Today, our conversation is about corporate governance, and I acknowledge that the development of a corporate governance framework that takes into account environmental and social matters is not an easy task. In Brazil, we have been very actively discussing which would be the best policies to improve how companies address and manage sustainability risks associated with their activities. So for instance, in September 2021, the central bank announced mandatory disclosure aligned with TCFD's recommendations for financial institutions. In the first phase, the rule requires the disclosure of qualitative aspects, and in a second phase, it will require quantitative information from financial companies. Also, in 2021, our SEC, Securities and Exchange Commission, amended its main rule governing listed companies' disclosure, including the addition of new requirements to increase transparency on sustainability-related matters. The new rule follows a comply or explain approach and emphasizes climate-related requirements. Both of these frameworks, interestingly, they introduce disclosure requirements that go beyond climate-related issues, meaning that other sustainability matters, such as the workforce and diversity, are also considered in these frameworks. Also, for state-owned companies, following discussions on the Working Party of State-Owned Privatization and Property of the OECD in 2021 also, Brazil was considered adherent to the guidelines on corporate governance for state-owned companies, and we are also domestically taking the step of improving SOE's indicators that starting this year will include ESG practices. So there's a lot going on in Brazil regarding disclosure, transparency, and sustainability. As part of our effort to improve corporate governance framework, we have also been benefiting from technical cooperation with the OECD. And last month, and I'll talk a lot about it, the OECD launched the report called Sustainability Policies and Practices for Corporate Governance in Brazil, in Rio. I wish I was there. To end these introductory remarks, I would like to highlight some of the main conclusions from the report, which may be also useful for other large emerging economies. First, the climate transition should be seen as an opportunity for Brazil to further develop capital markets. So Brazilian companies have access to tremendous natural resources, and global institutional investors have increasing the envelope to invest in sustainable businesses. So if our public markets can effectively connect both parts, Brazil's economy and the environment will both benefit greatly. Second, there is a strong demand for corporate sustainability disclosure from asset managers investing in Brazil. So companies have been responding to this demand, and probably what the market is missing the most is the adoption of a single sustainability accounting standard that is accepted by both local and foreign investors. And finally, while we have evidence that climate change should indeed be a top priority for regulators, we should also consider other sustainability matters. So again, in the case of Brazil, these priorities may include human capital, data security, water and wastewater management, and biodiversity. So I'll stop here and be happy to elaborate more on some of those topics. Thank you.
Thank you, Marco. So we have established that corporate governance is indeed important in helping corporations to transition into net zero. Yeah? And many companies have actually announced the net zero target by 2050, sovereign by 50, 60, 70. I would like to hear Alice on, beside this sustainability disclosure, what other things you think can help corporation to make this target more credible and achievable?
Thanks very much. So, as mentioned, I do think there's some importance in having quasi or fully public sector guide rails. So for our part, the 500 plus financial institutions from more than 45 countries are part of a UN process. So the criteria are set. The firms are required to keep their sectoral alliances updated on their progress. And as we proceed, I think we'll see better kind of synthesis of how they're doing and engagement with those firms that are not quite doing what's expected. The next thing that would really help is a bit similar to TCFD, which is anything we can do to encourage firms to adopt and start implementing transition planning is important, because it will, through time, improve the consistency and quality of the disclosure, of the planning they do and any disclosures that they make. So we saw that with TCFD. It took a little bit of time for firms to understand what was required of them and to embed the process. And you know, some firms, financial institutions I've spoken to have said that it's taken them several years already. They started in advance of COP to get the hang of transition planning. So that's definitely going to be important. Transparency and data so that we can have external scrutiny. And it was announced a few weeks ago that we will work with, this was announced by President Macron and Mike Bloomberg, but we would work with the UN, FSB, IMF, etc. And we have persuaded the data providers in our Net Zero Alliance to provide their data for free, to gather transition data on the progress that companies and financial institutions are making. We probably, like TCFD, need a path to mandatory. And just to mention before I hand back, on disclosures, it is the case that the ISSB global baseline that's being developed on climate disclosure makes reference to transition planning, and so does the TCFD, on which it's based. But it doesn't go into lots of specificity. And I guess what we've tried to do with the GFANS framework that was recently published for consultation is to elaborate on what good transition planning is and what disclosures that might therefore suggest are needed. But we would need support from the public sector to build that out into a more fulsome framework for disclosure. Thanks.
So, Gabriela, Marco mentioned before, right, that it's probably good or easier for us if we have a single unified accounting standard globally. Of course, we all see the benefit of that once we have achieved that standard, right? But we all know that, even in one country, you have several accounting standards, and, to coordinate in the global level, I think will create another challenge. So do you see the trade-off between these two systems, more national approach versus global? And, I know that probably we're supposed to be in the gray area in the middle, but what's the characteristic, or what can we say about, the pluses and minuses and where we should head it to?
Okay, thank you very much. Well, my first, what I would say first is that I don't exactly see a trade-off between national standards or regulations and international. I see it as complementary, and that we don't have to make an option between one and the other. Jurisdictions are, of course, or have, of course, the prerogatives of setting or adopting national sustainability disclosure frameworks or standards that take into account the singularities of the local context, etc. But global consistency is fundamental, to my view, when it comes to standards, especially as regards the basic or more fundamental values, and in case of ethics, which is my perspective, ethics standards, also because most of the ethical principles are universal. They are not subject to, they cannot be calibrated, and they are not subject to trade-offs because they are fundamental, universal, etc. At the same time, fragmentation is not in the does not work in the public interest, because if the regulation, standards, etc. are fragmented, different all over, it may undermine investors' confidence, investors' trust, and the investors' ability to understand which framework they should use. Moreover, we are talking here about capital markets and about corporate governance and sustainability, and how both can work in the interest of companies to attract funding, to provide value for the economic system and social balance, etc. But capital markets are global nowadays. Capital flows don't know frontiers. So in such a context, it is fundamental to have some a common global baseline of principles, ruling and informing corporate disclosures, much beyond local standards and regulation, which should exist and may exist. The Code of Ethics, for instance, the ISBA Code of Ethics, is most of the times adopted that way, is that the jurisdictions adopt the code and the international standards, and then they make some adjustments to their national specificities. I think that local regulation and standards should be left more for enforcement and supervisory purposes, which is by nature local and takes a special proximity between enforcer and enforced entities, and that these global standards, the fundamental principles, for instance, at the ISBA Code, as the sustainability standards already therein, and the ones that will be developed, as I said, and we are starting to do this work, which has already been recognized by the Financial Stability Board as part of the future infrastructure, together with the ISSP standards being developed and the IAASB. So they speak to ethics values which are not subject to any trade-off. Integrity, independence issues, this is what we are talking about. Transparency are universal and fundamental to all countries and frameworks. So, all in all, what I see is the need for this global, international framework of international standards, OECD principles, the ISSP standards, ISBA standards, etc., and then national adoption of this global common framework and local adjustments or enhancements or improvements of this international baseline to be fit for purpose for each country.
Thank you, Gabriela. Marco, we're entering the world of policy normalization, right? Both on the fiscal and the monetary side, and global liquidity could tighten in the future, cost of fund increasing. On the corporate level, we see the listing of companies more than the ones that started to be listed, yeah. And then we want to add more to the corporate regulation, right? Which is to add corporate disclosure for sustainability, for example. How do you facilitate, between making sure that company can adopt a good sustainability disclosure while at the same time giving them good access to capital market?
Thank you. Yeah, indeed, this global long-term delisting trend is also an issue in Brazil. So the numbers from this OECD report that I'm mentioned repeatedly are that from 2000 to 2020, 542 companies were delisted from the Brazilian stock market. And during the same period, only 190 were listed. And we had only 2 years where we had positive net listings. And developing debt and capital markets is a top priority for us in many different fronts. In more general terms, in relation to corporate governance frameworks, I think we need to strike a balance between what investors effectively need from issuers and on the other side, the costs more regulation to achieve it may represent to the companies. So these sustainability policies and practices for corporate governance in Brazil show that asset managers investing in the country, they are interested in better sustainability disclosure. 59% of large asset managers, they report that they review the sustainability disclosure of all the companies they invest in. And almost 30% do that for certain strategic industries. And that helps explain why more than 3/4 of asset managers support a mandatory regulation requiring that Brazilian companies disclose a sustainability report with material information. There is disclaimer there, I would say, that the current use of different sustainability accounting standards, and that speaks a little bit to what Gabriela was saying before, by public companies in Brazil, kind of complicates a little bit asset managers' task of taking sustainability into consideration. So in Brazil, a lot of companies, a lot of listed companies, they use GRI standards. The second one most used are the SASB standards. And this is probably the reason why both a majority of asset managers investing in Brazil and the Brazilian public companies support the adoption of a common international ESG reporting standard for listed companies. That does not, it's not in a position of what you were saying, right? What we're saying here is just standardization somehow within the country, but maybe looking up at international standards. Another aspect here is that while the demand for better sustainability disclosure clearly exists, another consideration is compliance costs, right? So if sustainability disclosure is only required for listed companies, there should be an incentive, or there may be an incentive, a disincentive actually, for companies to go public, right? So we need to balance that when we write regulation to make sure that companies cope with significant compliance costs is relevant. And finally, there's one thing that was very interesting that I found in this report. Not the other things that were not interesting, but this one really called my attention. is that when you see the numbers for the green bond issuance in Brazil, and we are here discussing disclosure and quality of the regulation, right, that set the right incentives for companies. The numbers that this report shows point to around the world, the companies that issue green bonds more frequently are financial companies, and in Brazil is not. So utilities are the ones that issue most green bonds in Brazil. And it's kind of puzzling because the regulation that I just mentioned that the central bank adopted on TCFD is going faster or being adopted faster in the country than for non-financial companies. And yet, we're having, you know, these many green bonds being issued by companies that had their regulatory frameworks changed in the recent past, which makes me think that there is this interplay between the quality of the regulation and disclosure, and you have to pay attention to both of these things in order to enable the business environment. Thank you.
Thank you. So I would like to continue on the sustainability disclosure, Gabriela. We know that independent third party is of course important, right, in the assurance of sustainability disclosure, but not many countries have actually require assurance of all sustainability disclosure. Is there a balance between slowly phasing in, or do you see a balance between the two extremes?
Well, what I can tell is that it is understandable that in the absence of a comprehensive assurance standard on sustainability, the countries or jurisdictions are not yet requiring that much that sustainability information be assured. But we also know that it will be needed as much as for financial information. It is important that there is a third-party opinion and review of the sustainability information. I would say even more important, if I may say, than for financial information. So this is going to happen, and this must happen. We are in a transitional period, of course, as I was saying, and that even if we have the objective to have a similar level of assurance for financial reporting and sustainability reporting is in an evolving area, as we have been discussing here, and it is important to allow for some time for regulators and standard setters to develop robust, appropriate standards and regulation in this respect. And so this progressive approach to enhance the level of assurance of sustainability information started with what we call limited assurance engagement, which, by the way, is what has been agreed in the compromised European text for a directive, and going through all over the way to what we call the reasonable assurance, which is the other end of the journey. It is important that in this transitional period, there is some, the interest parties, stakeholders, investors, etc., have at least some level of comfort provided by an assurance provider in terms of a statement expressed in a negative form, which is the limited assurance, that no matter has been identified by the auditor or the assurance provider to conclude that the subject matter is materially misstated. So this is the minimum level of comfort that they have to have, is that a third independent party says, well, we haven't identified anything that materially compromises the reliability and the quality of this information. However, a few notes from my side. This transitional period, this transitory regime, should last for the shorter period of time possible. And it means as we are developing the necessary assurance standards, and the IAASB is doing that, some guidance, some limited assurance should be in place, and this limited assurance should rely on appropriate guidance, which is also somehow available not only by the existing standards, the IAASP standards on assurance, sustainability assurance, but also on the ethical side from the AISBA side with respect to ethics assurance. The AISBA and the IAASP are working on this front to provide robust and bespoke and fit-for-purpose assurance and ethics and independence standards, because the former will not succeed without the latter. Ethics standards are as needed for assurance as technical assurance standards. So this interim regime of limited assurance should grant that it will be provided based on appropriate guidance and existing or to be developed standards.
Thanks. So on this, Marco, we see climate change and data security, right? How do you think the regulators can maximize the use of their own resource for the sustainability disclosure?
Thank you. So it would be extremely difficult for companies and regulators to deal with a great number of sustainability matters in a short period of time. So I think the answer, to be really short here, is we need to think about prioritizing what is the most relevant issue, and also have flexibility for companies to identify what they would need to disclose. But on the other side, we need to think about the impact of this information, right? So there is this report another report from the OECD, the Climate Change and Corporate Governance, showing that listed companies facing climate change as a financially material risk represents 2/3 of global market cap. So it is a lot of money that is at stake out there. So there is clearly a priority, right, to deal with climate change first from a global perspective. But however, depending on the industry or region where these companies operate, they may face other relevant risks, right? And that is the case of Brazil. If you see what is in the sustainability policies and practice for corporate governance in Brazil, the types of risks that are listed here, they vary a little bit. So in the last years, human capital, climate change, biodiversity, and data security were the most frequently considered sustainability matters in shareholders' resolutions in Brazil. So this gives us a somewhat different perspective of what should be disclosed and prioritized going forward. Thank you.
Thank you. So Alice, we're going back to the start. So we receive pressure, right? Not only from ourselves because of the net zero target that each of us has as sovereign or corporation, but also from shareholders and civil society, right? How do you manage this, and do you have an idea of the best tools to build a more constructive relationship? Can we follow the say on pay, say to make say on climate, for example, or any ideas?
Thanks. So what I would say is that I think to date, in many of the resolutions we see, shareholders are somehow trying to get firms to do almost relatively basic things, so make relatively basic disclosures on emissions and targets and so on and so forth. And I guess what we've been trying to do with our transition planning framework is to get them up the curve so that there is very quickly standardization of the key data on targets, on metrics for monitoring progress, etc. But we're also asking them to do something, I think, which is quite unusual, or is to engage extensively, because we are saying to the financial firms, you have to do scope 3. So there, in some places, you know, there's debate about scope 3, but in this case, we're saying this is what matters if you're a financial firm, the emissions you finance. And of course, if you're a mortgage lender or you're a lender to corporates, you can't manage down real economy emissions without engaging very extensively with a huge range of stakeholders, from households, through corporates, through governments, your own government, other governments, on transition. So I think we're trying to do something quite unusual, which is to open up and make much more discursive what's the appropriate transition path for a country, for different sectors, for households, et cetera, and for firms to be much more transparent about the financing choices they're therefore making, which I think is quite novel, but it could be quite transformative. Thanks.
Thank you. So I think we're good in terms of timing. Thank you for a wonderful session. I hope everyone's feel this session's beneficial. And I thank all the speakers. Thank you.
Once again, thank you very much to the chairperson and all speakers for this second session. Excellencies, distinguished participants, ladies and gentlemen, before we move on to our next agenda, we would like to acknowledge the presence of Chief Executive of Capital Market Supervisor, concurrently member of the Board of Commissioner from Indonesia Financial Services Authority, Bapak Husin. Selamat sore, selamat datang. So now, before we continue to our third and final discussion, we would like to present a keynote speech from the Minister of State-Owned Enterprises of Republic of Indonesia. Representing the Minister, kindly be invited to the stage Vice Minister of State-Owned Enterprises of Indonesia, Bapak Kartika Wirjo Atmojo.
Excellency, honorable guests, Pak Hussein, all parties from OECD and all the supporting G20 members here. Thank you for the opportunity. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you again for attending the G20 Indonesia 2022 Corporate Governance Forum. I hope this event will be a great opportunity to know more about Indonesia, and especially in my session, to understand and share our experience regarding the governance of state-owned enterprise and our transformation initiative for long-term sustainability and inclusive development. We have followed the previous sessions. Some of our improvement in state-owned enterprise actually already forward-looking to actually accommodate some of the recommendations so that we have better governance in the future. Let us begin by introducing about the role of our SOEs. As is in other countries, our SOE has two major roles. First is an agent for value creation, but second, we also became the agent of development. As value creator, SOE are expected to pursue profit and contribute to the regional economy in general, and also to contribute to the state revenue, and also for the listed SOE to increase their share valuation. Meanwhile, as an agent of development to the nation, Indonesia's SOE are expected to support the community welfare and becoming pioneering agent. SOE are entrusted to support the pursuit of fulfillment in the form of providing high-quality goods and services for the people. Other than that, SOE should become a pioneer in business sectors and activities that have not been penetrated by the private sectors. We are also actively participate in providing guidance and assistance to the underprivileged economic group in the community. By carrying out those roles, not only SOE needs to support the long-term stability of the nation, but also maintaining good performance in terms of financial performance, and also to make sure that the balance sheet is sustainable for the long-term performance of the companies. If we are focusing on the value creation aspects, for the past few years, SOE have continuously creating values and contribute to the Indonesian economy with a promising performance. Our listed SOEs, total shareholders return, TSR, exceeding the total TSR of non-SOE listed companies, based on the Indonesian Stock Exchange figures. The total market capitalization of SOE listed in the Jakarta Stock Exchange is approximately around 30% of the total market capitalization of Jakarta Stock Exchange, with a total value of around 1,766 trillion by end of 2019, by January 2019, which increased to 1,984 trillion by end of December 2021, recording an effective capital appreciation of around 200 plus trillion, in which 149 of it is capital gain coming from the improvement of the valuation of our state and enterprise listed companies. Some of the top list SOEs that managed to carry out the roles as value creator are Bank Rakyat Indonesia, Bank Mandiri, Bank BNI, and Telkom Indonesia, which are the top 5 of the Indonesian largest market capitalization in Indonesia, Jakarta Stock Exchange. These 4 SOE companies continues to grow with good performance and show strong resilience. Since 2005, the share value of those 4 entities has continued to rise in general and actively conduct several corporate actions and maintain positive trend in the market. They are also widely held by international institutional investors globally. Ladies and gentlemen, in the past 2.5 years, with Minister Eric and myself and the other Vice Minister, we entered the new era of Ministry of SOE. We have initiated many programs and strategies to accelerate growth and optimize the role of SOE, such as, first, we create and implement our new core values, akhlak. Second, we also formulated 5 strategic priorities to ensure the long-term sustainability of our companies. Third, we improve the span of control of our portfolio through optimizing the number of SOE, which we have managed to reduce the number of initially 110 to 41 through mergers, such as in port sector and Syariah Bank, also by forming holding initiatives, such as holding in ultramicro, holding in insurance, holding in aviation and tourism, Pertamina PG and holding, Mine ID, mining holding, and also survey holding. All of these actions have effectively increasing our monitoring process and effort by closing the span of control challenges. Fourth, in order to improve our business model, innovations, which will continue to deliver value, we have 88 strategic projects running ongoing, which half of it hopefully will be completed by 2023. Fifth, we also support our 5 SOE to be the world-class companies and to successfully enlisted in the world's prestigious companies list, such as Fortune 500 and Forbes Global 2000. And the last, but also most importantly, is the human capital development through various development programs such as upskilling, reskilling, and scholarship program and certified internship through our SOEs. As I mentioned earlier, MSOE have introduced 5 strategic priorities as our principles to reform and transform SOE. First is to maintain and improve our economic and social value for Indonesia, increasing economic value and social impact, especially in the field of food, energy, and health sustainability. Second is a business model innovation, revamping the business model through ecosystem development, cooperations, strategic partnership, and consideration of improving the stakeholder management and more focus for the core business of each corporation. Third is we aspire to have a technology leadership in different sectors. We want to institutionalize digital capabilities such as data management, big data, AI, and others. Fourth, we want also SOE to be the energizer of investment in Indonesia. We currently have many asset optimization program in our sectors such as port, toll road, airport, and so on and so forth. And fifth, we want to unleash the talent of SOE as the talent of the Republic of Indonesia, educating and training the workforce, developing quality human resources, professionalizing governance, and HR selection systems. To maintain the sustainability of SOEs, transformation of SOE business must be carried out simultaneously with transformation of risk management and good corporate governance, followed by strengthening the talent management strategy. We realized that the risk management and GCG hold major and central role to create healthy and sustainable companies. We have learned from past historical mistakes and cases with lack of risk management and GCG can lead to some serious problems. We have 2 serious corporate problems in the past couple of years. First example is Waskita Karya. Waskita Karya is one of our contractor company. Waskita was experiencing financial difficulties since 2000 with a total debt reaching 100 trillion rupiah and require restructuring process. Some of the root cause are poor project selection and project planning, lack of integrated monitoring system, and liability mismatch that causes significant cash flow gap. Construction SOE generally face financial problem mainly because decision-making process has not followed and implement the principle of corporate governance sustainability. The second issue is Jiwasraya, is one of our insurance company. Jiwasraya experienced a shortage of liquidity and faced insolvency issues, which was indicated by negative equity and negative risk-based capital, and Jiwasraya finally had to be restructured. Jiwasraya did not transform and improve its internal risk management system and GCG, thus resulting in unsustainable practices and product and weak investment decisions. That kind of experience triggered us to quickly fix the problem and has been done in SOE construction sector by using 5 tools of improvement. First is improvement on the decision-making process using decision metrics and implementation of financial dashboard. Second is additional risk management organ and function. Third, strengthening the function of Board of Commissioners. Fourth, amendment of the Article of Association related to the improvement of corporate governance practices. And fifth, create BOD and BOC Charter and Handbook. In more broader context, the Ministry of SOE is in the process of issuing a new permen or decree on risk management. Now, some of you understood that there is recently a government decree, PP 23, that has been issued. This permen on risk management will be the following product that will become the more detailed implementation phase of the PP 23. In this decree on risk management, BOC or Supervisory Board and BOD, Executive Board, are responsible to undertake the necessary actions to set the risk strategy and tolerance, capture required risk parameter, monitor against risk tolerance buffers, and mitigate and report risk on an ongoing basis, and improving the control system of the company. One of the most important parameters to determine the strength of the risk management role is to visit the completeness of the organs in the risk management value chain. These organs include BOC, including its specialization of its committee, audit committee, risk committee, and integrated risk committee, internal audit function, BOD as a board collectively, and also the specifically function of chief financial officer and chief risk officers. Our banking SOE typically have the most comprehensive risk organ as they are mandated by OJK and also following the Basel framework. We adopted OJK regulation to our SOE and have in our prospective decree mandated minimum risk organ based on the size and complexity of its SOE and also based on the sectoral challenges. So we are regulating the general framework, but we will implement the risk framework through each sector differently based on the risk factor of each sector. We hope by issuing this guideline of all of our SOE, either regulated by OJK or not, we'll have a more upgraded risk function that can help not only in addressing operational and technical risks, but also goes beyond to identify and mitigate strategic risks. The decree that we are about to launch, in addition to set the guidance on risk organ and the respective roles, also set the role of the ministry to quantify, prioritize, monitor, report, and set policies to mitigate potential risks in our invested companies. To this end, the ministry itself will need to have an enterprise risk management platform that will be able to house the algorithm to measure and quantify risks, prioritize them based on each risk potential impact and probability, and develop a structural framework to monitor and mitigate risks. This year, actually, the first year that we as a ministry has already issued a consolidated consolidated financial statement, which already inclusive of all state-owned enterprise under our management. This will be the phase 2 of the project, as the decree sets the broad ruling and what will be required to manage risk at the level of each portfolio. Phase 2 will design the enterprise risk management model to facilitate capturing this parameter for meaningful decision-making process in a different sector. This project is the result of collaboration with World Bank and ADB, who provided technical assistance to formulate the approach and methodology. And also will involve the SOE members, as well as the Ministry of Finance, in the extent of SOE impact to fiscal balance, and also as a role of the ultimate shareholder of Indonesian SOE. Besides the risk and GC aspect, to generate long-term competitive financial returns and positive social impact, SOE are encouraged to implement sustainable investment through ESG concept. There are 3 major initiatives. In environment, we do several initiatives in eco-lifestyle, decarbonization initiative in our energy SOE, MSOE carbon market, and also EV adoption from downstream to upstream in our mining sector. The S part, social, we have gender equality program, young talent leadership, refocusing our corporate social responsibility to education and empowerment, and also financial inclusion through our banking system. On the G part, on the governance, we will issue anti-bribery and corruption detailed guideline. We consolidate our financial statement and implementing the most advanced governance and risk management structure as we described earlier. Some example of SOE commitment related to ESG has been done, for example, by Bank Rakyat Indonesia. BRI has continued to develop and pay special attention to ESG with the purpose of empowering the people and nurturing the planet. BRI targeted to be a world-class sustainable banking group by 2026, and hopefully will soon can be included in the S&P ESG index, with some performance metrics such as net zero carbon, financial inclusion, and also market capitalization. Currently, BRI has involved intensely also in the S part, the social part, in terms of community development program, such as empowering underprivileged women through the ultra micro ecosystem known program named by Mekar. As of March 2022, PNM Mekar program has provided loan to 11.5 million female debtors with total outstanding of 28.7 trillion. PNM Mekar also provide access to capital, assistance on capacity building for underprivileged community and SME, especially for housewives in rural area. Second, empowering the village community through Brilliant Village Initiative that provide incubation and financial literacy program for BRI fostered villages that are located in secluded rural remote area. As of December 2021, it has covered more than 1,100 villages across Indonesia. And the third one is empowering the micro, small, medium enterprises through Link UMKM platform that provide training and capability enhancement for the MSME community through website and application. We believe all of our programs and initiatives will support the improvement of our SOE transformation and ensure the governance and risk management implementation. Hence, we also increase the overall value of SOE and its sustainability. Lastly, we highly appreciate to all G20 members and all the delegates that present today, that we hope the session today will give important insight and takeaways for all of us in improving the SOE governance and also the private sector governance. Thank you again. Have a fruitful meeting today.
Thank you. Thank you, Pak Kartika, for the keynote speech presenting insights on state-owned enterprises in Indonesia. Following that keynote speech, now for the next 45 minutes, we will have our final discussion. And the topic is about strong state-owned enterprises governance for sustainable and inclusive development. Resource persons for this session, they are ready here. Ms. Nawal Nelly, Deputy for Finance and Risk Management of the Ministry of State-Owned Enterprises of Indonesia. Ms. Mathilde Mesnard, Deputy Director of the Directorate for Financial and Enterprise Affairs of OECD. And Mr. Yurendra Basnet, Senior Public Management Specialist of the Asian Development Bank. This session will be moderated by Bapak Rabin Hatari. He is the Assistant Minister for Industry from the Ministry of State-Owned Enterprises of Indonesia. So the moderator will sit on the far left.
Far left. I'm sitting over there, but unless you want to moderate, I'm okay with it.
Okay, so can we give a round of applause for our final discussion session? Pak Rabin, time is yours.
Thank you all. I mean, this is one of a big challenge if you're moderating the last sessions. Everyone is looking forward in their beds or they go to the beach, right? I'll make sure this session will be the liveliest one that you all have seen in the afternoon, okay? I think we have a good lineup over here. First of all, thank you, Pak Hussein, Pak Tiko, for this opportunity for us to share a number of things that I think in this session have been thinking a lot about, which the two are governance and climate. I think if you all think about governance and climate, these are two different nexus, right? And governance is something that, as indicated by Vice Minister Tiko, is something that has been pushed by our Ministry of SOE on the reform agenda. Climate is a new issue that needs to be addressed at the policy level as an institutions. So both of this issue, governance and climate, are institutional issues. And to discuss those issues, I think we have a good, strong lineup here. We have Ibu Nelly, who is our Deputy Minister for Risk Management and Finance. She will share, she is, I think, I would say, one of the best risk managers in Indonesia. Before she joined our ministry, she was a partner at EY, having been in numerous number of countries across the world. So she brought that experiences about managing the risk at the policy levels. Next, we have Yurendra. Yurendra, again, from ADB, and ADB has been a partner of Ministry of SOE in our reform agenda. ADB has also completed their diagnostic assessments of our SOE reform. So focusing on what we've done, he has looked at it. And lastly, we have Matilda. Matilda is a deputy director from OECD. Now, what we like to hear from her, at least for me, is to understand other country experiences and the experiences that OECD has gotten from working with other countries. I think that's very important. The fact that the countries such as Vietnam, Brazil, those two countries are also have big SOEs, and the reform that have been undertaken by them could provide a good insights for us in Indonesia. So I think without further ado, let me ask the questions. And this one is going to be on governance. Sorry, let me just open this. So the first question, I think this is going to be about governance and focusing on the experience for other countries. Matilda, from your experiences working in the SOE reform in other countries, especially on the governance reform, what would be the priorities for SOE reform to tackle? You know, countries have different unique characteristics, you know. There are also issues about local content, you know, and characteristics that needs to be taken into account for the reform agenda. So from the OECD experience, how would you put the context on how the reform should be? The floor is yours.
On priorities for reform?
Yes, on priorities reform.
Okay, so clearly, I mean, much more must be done to implement governance, accountability, and transparency standards as set out in our OECD guidelines on corporate governance of state-owned enterprises. And I will highlight some priorities to our view that are based on all the experience we have discussing with many different countries, including emerging economies countries. One of the first priorities is the centralization of the ownership function, because it is a strong driver in the development of corporate governance requirements. Of course, it can, for example, help reinforce and mobilize competencies relevant to sustainable development, generally. For example, organizing pool of experts on matters that are essential to enhancing related goals, such as financial reporting or disclosure on sustainability or performance management more generally, and also very importantly on board nomination. And this, you know, whole like gathering all these competencies within a centralized ownership function helps a lot to have a better policy coherence. The second priority that I would underline is, and it is a difficult one, it's always super difficult, it's to ensure proper balance between the commercial objectives and the non-commercial objectives. It's quite a challenge because SOEs are SOEs for good reasons usually, and it's because they do have non-commercial objectives. And sometimes these non-commercial objectives are really at odds with the commercial ones. And here we need a strong, an active and an informed state owner that is able to dialogue with the board on conflicting objectives, to identify solutions. And what is really critical, it's like to make sure that these objectives are clearly defined, transparent, costed appropriately, and this is not easy. It's usually very complex. And in the case, I mean, because we are talking about sustainability, you know, what needs to be done is to redefine these objectives with the boards, and considering upgrades, for example, in terms of reducing the emission levels of polluting assets, and of course doing all that while still maintaining a healthy competition. So this is quite a challenging priority. And of course, another priority that's quite obvious, but once again, it's easy to say, not easy to do, to ensure, to strengthen the transparency and the disclosure both at the level of the individual SOEs, but also at the level of the state portfolio altogether. And, you know, from what we see currently, it doesn't look like there is, in many countries, a kind of a systematic analysis and a disclosure of the portfolio level exposure to climate-related risks in annual reporting by the ownership entities. So that's something that's really progress that needs to happen. And this requires also, you know, to have this capacity to have a systematic transparency and portfolio level transparency. You need to have high quality, comparable, and consistent financial and non-financial disclosure by the individual SOEs. And we know that, I mean, not only for SOEs, but for companies in general, that's a process that is currently being tackled, and it's quite difficult. So this is a very important line for reforms and efforts by ownership entities everywhere in OECD and non-OECD countries. That's really a current priority. And the last priority, but really not the least, and it's a fundamental one that we see in all countries, again, is like the SOE boards. And I was very interested by the presentation in this regard. The SOE boards, they must be empowered to really be able to act autonomously with the right information. And it remains an issue in many countries, including OECD countries. And when we do accession process to the OECDs, this last point, having, you know, independent, competent, knowledgeable boards, it's always difficult. Usually, I mean, there might be why it's difficult, because they tend to be hampered by direct ministerial appointments of management. Also, I mean, their decision might be bypassed by informal channels of communication, and also they might receive informal instructions or even formal instructions from different ministries. So in this case, you don't have a board that is really empowered to make the strategic decision for the SOE. And, sorry. Also, so you need, in SOEs in particular, to have strong requirements for independence of the outside directors. And also you need to improve the disclosure related to the nomination process of such boards. And it was mentioned several times in the previous panels. Boards are ongoing. A critical change is like to include new competencies, new knowledge, new experience related to sustainability. And this is valid for non-SOEs or for SOEs. So that's really, this last point is quite important, because this is where the change will happen or not happen. If we have boards that begin not only to be empowered and independent, but knowledgeable about all these new sustainability issues. And current boards are not in general. So that's quite a fundamental change that needs to happen if we want to have real impact and change in SOEs also.
Okay. Thank you on that. Let me ask a following questions to you. You know, from your experience in other countries, if you were to rank these priorities, right? Which one would you say would be the ones that the most difficult ones that any countries would need to be able to address, and at the same time has to be the ones that give that certain credibility that the reform is happening? Of this, I would say 5 priorities that you mentioned, right? 4 priorities, I mean.
I would say the last one, this board issue, because, I mean, that's the really new thing. Of course, like having a centralized ownership function is something we have been talking about for long. It helps because it helps like gathering the competencies, etc. This balance between commercial and non-commercial objectives is also a very old, complex challenge. But I mean, the change will begin with the boards having real boards making real decision, but with the required competencies. So I think that might be the priority, nominating boards that will drive this change towards sustainability.
Good. Thank you. I think that's very insightful. Thank you so much. Well, you know, after hearing what you mentioned, what you said, and after hearing Vice Minister Tiko's presentations, I'm happy that at least Indonesia is on the right track. But to know more about Indonesia, let me turn to Bu Nelly, who has been on the forefront, right? On the trenches, working with our SOE day and night, you know, arguing with them, making sure that they're in order. So, when you do all of this, what challenges do you see that Indonesia is facing in promoting strong and financial and non-financial disclosure by SOEs?
Okay.
And mind you, Ibu Nelly was not a civil servant 2 years ago. She's come from a private sector, so I think I'd like to know more about this.
Thank you so much.
And could you also share with us some of the government initiatives and good practices for meeting these challenges? Thank you, Ibu. Floor is yours.
Thanks, Pak Rabin. Actually, the biggest challenge, if I look back like 2 years ago, just at the beginning of this process, the biggest challenge was first, our portfolio was so diverse. Diverse in terms of size, in terms of cluster, in terms of the governing body. So we have SOEs that comply to OJK rule, very compliant, etc. And we have SOEs that are not public and not governed by OJK. So the standard of disclosure and reporting across SOEs were so broad. That's challenge number one. Challenge number two, and I address this, it's probably, I'm coming from a planning as well. I address this in the complexity and the lack of coordination during the planning process between us as a ministry, the SOE, and sometimes the interference, like what you mentioned, the technical ministries, we call them, yeah? So during that planning process, there is no distinctive cost allocation discussion before an initiation of a strategic project or something. So that kind of two complexities made the biggest challenge of our portfolio. And to tackle this, I think the entire team, we were very organized in a sense that in terms of the complex structure, let's do something about it, yeah? So we streamlined the number of SOE based on cluster, based on similarity of ecosystem and value chain. That allows the span of control to be more manageable, and that allows less not so healthy competition among SOEs. So that's part of the reform. Second part of the reform, and this we did very early on, we engaged IFC at that time to do a diagnostic on our corporate governance. I acknowledge what you just mentioned, Matilda. So those are challenges, and some of proportion of the diagnostic was around board independence, yeah? But we are doing a lot on that. If you look into our composition this year, you will see more professional, people from legal, people from finance, people from the industry who are extracted into the board composition. We're not going to stop here, of course, yeah, it's a continuous process, but the composition of the board is much more diverse in terms of skill than it was before, and in terms of gender as well, so I forgot to mention that. So we did a diagnostic. One of the findings is that we've addressed it. We've also did a study case with the World Bank team. Our study case with the ADB and the World Bank team, at that time we asked ourselves, what should we at the ministry level disclose to the greater public in a consistent way? So we looked at how New Zealand did this. We looked at how Sweden did this. We looked at the Korean SOE team, how they did this. And we sort of like learned a bit from each of those. And we're so lucky because we were supported significantly by our Accountant Association, without whom we wouldn't have been able to finish on time. That was last year. So greatest support to our Association of Public Accountants, who sort of like supported on how we should disclose, what should we include, how to formulate the policies, accounting policies. Yeah. We got strong support from the team, and if you go to our website, you will find our consolidated financial statement. And we're committed to do that on a yearly basis, quarterly basis, and we're committed to have it open to the public as well. With that, transparency of the institution, of the management institution, is something that we are serious about, and that's something that I think not only me, Pak Menteri, Pak Wamen, and everybody also in the team are gung-ho about it, because what we are managing, the SOE portfolio, as a portfolio, it's quite sizable. Yeah? As a portfolio, it's quite complex. Individually, the risk reaction will be different than when you put them together as a portfolio. So we genuinely needed a consolidated financial statement that can show not only the dividends or equity investment or whatever, but shows, it allows us to analyze the debt composition, allow us to calculate return on investment, economic value add, return on invested capital. Yeah? All of those parameters needed at the portfolio level will give you a different picture than on the individual level. So that's the second step on transparency. The third step, and this was something we are going to do, is on risk management. Risk management, I have to admit, we learned a lot from the OJK team here, Pak Hussein, thanks so much for the calls and benchmarking question. We realized that our banks are the most, what do you call it? They meet all the boxes. They give you great economic value add. They give you a great total shareholder return. If you saw Pak Tiko's chart at that time, that's two parameters that minority shareholders care about. They also are the major players in distributing kredit usaha rakyat. So for an institution that has a dual responsibility and can do both well at the same time, we have to learn something from them. So what we did, we talked to OJK, tell us how are you measuring this, how are you managing the risk of this differently than the others. So we extracted some of the points from that learning. One of the key points that we noticed is that financial institutions are conglomerations as well. And conglomerations have their own peculiar complexities. So their governance structure needs to be different than the governance structure of single individual corporations. So one of OJK's rule was for financial institutions who are conglomeration, they have to have a special committee within the BOC at the senior level that manages the risk interaction between the subsidiaries and the parent. Yeah? So in our new risk ministerial decree, we're gonna, sorry for this, we're gonna copy paste OJK's regulation to the broader SOE. So we're copying this to the broader SOEs, and we're learning from that process. That's one of the essence of the new risk management regulation that we're going to issue. We're also going to be helped significantly by ADB, who is also helping us in building the platform for the risk management. So we're going to ask for reporting from the SOEs. Risk reporting, financial reporting, of course, goes without saying because we started the consolidation, internal audit reporting, and compliance reporting to allow us to see at a portfolio level what should we be, when should we interfere. Now, to prevent us from over-entering, there is a clear distinction between our role as a ministry and the role of the BOD and BOC. In the new mandate, we empower the BOD and BOC to undertake the risk management responsibilities. So they are the accountable person, we act like the OJK for the banks, quote unquote. I'm copying OJK's hat again. So if you are too far off from a certain risk parameter, we're going to interfere for the risk side, but we leave the decision making and the strategy making for the individual board. So that's what we're trying to do. So in short, there is a bit on from our end, the consolidated financial statement. That's new numbers that we've seen them as a portfolio for the first time. We've also have the realignment of the portfolio, which is a quite significant initiative. I mean, this is, we've reduced from 108 SOE to 42 SOEs. And they're more aligned in terms of business interactivity. And soon we hope the issuance of the new risk law, as well as the establishment of the ERM platform. I think that's what we've done in a nutshell, but I mean, I'm sorry, I'm taking more time than I should.
I think that's actually, in fact, after hearing from you, I've got an additional questions, right? You know, you mentioned, and also Patiko mentions about the importance of risk management, but, you know, on the other part, when you think about risk, right? Often people, when we try to push for better risk management, they will have some say about it because they think it might prolong the business process, right? It increases more bureaucracy, right? How would you answer that question?
Okay, with the absent, I think this is a question that, that's a concern, But without risk management, I think we can't do anything. We can't do anything well. But if I have to answer one thing about how risk management can accelerate the decision-making process, we are living in a situation where people sometimes are afraid of making decisions. Having a good risk corridor allow you to take the risk that is commensurate with what the shareholders mandates you to do. You're only going to be blamed if you take excessive risk, but not risk within that corridor. Once you have that corridor, executives, our board are very decisive. But without that corridor, they become ambiguous and not decisive. And I like the analogy that Patiko once highlighted. If you want to have a tuk-tuk, tuk-tuk is, you know, the car in Thailand that is very slow and very loud. They don't have good brakes. If you want to be fast, don't have risk management, then that's your analogy. But if you want to be fast and have a good brake, you want to become like the Ferraris of the world. They're actually fast, but they're governed by certain tools to prevent them from falling into a certain risk trap. So whether you want to be a tuk-tuk or a Ferrari, that's your choice, but our scale is definitely not this. Okay. I conclude that. I don't know if that analogy helped or even worse.
Analogy helps me. I think I'd rather be a tuk-tuk. Anyhow. Okay, moving on. Yurendra, you know, you hear about the best practices that has been done, you know, from Matilda. Unelli talks about reforms that has happened, institutional reform, if I may add, in the SOE. Now, you've done a diagnostic assessment with our Ministry of SOE. Now, looking at that, your study, maybe first I'd like to know, is it true? Right? Okay, are we on the right track, you know? Second of all, you know, from you looking at it, what are the key preliminary policy conditions, you know, that will help us to even increase our performance valuation and management of our SOE, right? When from, you know, study from your diagnostic assessment. And even from your diagnostic assessment, could you share with us some of the performance cases of management and evaluations that you think might have significant impact, in our SOE reform? Rianda, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Maybe before I start, I wanted to say that whoever decided no PowerPoint, I'm so happy because I'm not sure how I would have fared after Partiko's amazing presentation with information-packed slide deck. So that was a really good decision and has put me to ease. First of all, let me thank the organizers for giving me this opportunity to participate in this panel and share our work. I'm Yurendra from the Asian Development Bank. Maybe before I jump into the question, just to share with you that we have a long-standing engagement with state-owned enterprises across our developing member countries in the Asia-Pacific region, and that's quite a variety of economies at different levels of economic development. I also wanted to maybe make one point, perhaps feeling slightly that it did not get highlighted as much as I would have liked. We did acknowledge that SOEs play a dual role, but I think it's really important, particularly in this current context, to mention that the development role has been quite instrumental, first in responding to the pandemic, being affected from the pandemic, and now having to shoulder the greater burden of the policy to engineer the post-pandemic recovery. So there's quite a lot being asked of the SOEs, and I think all the measures that are being put together with regards to the corporate governance are in that right direction to ensure that they do provide that greater value for the country and its people. Rabin, to your question, I'm reminded of my first day in a graduate school at London School of Economics. My professor for economics on the first day, he asked us what is the most valuable asset in a company. And at that time, being first day, we all fumbled and said different things. Someone from the room said human resources. He got corrected by the professor and he said workforce. Workforce is the most valuable asset in any company. They are the ones that generate the value. So therefore, a successful performance evaluation and management system, in our view, would be one where the workforce is being able to upskill and reskill, as Partiko's slide mentioned. Two, as Ibu Nelly said, clear risk corridors to take the decisions that they are entrusted to take. I will return to this, but Parabin, to your question on our own diagnostic, just wanted to highlight two key points from the finding. This was for Indonesia, but I think it's applicable for many economies in the South, in Asia Pacific. The first is the issue of ownership. Earlier, there was a point that was mentioned about principal-agent problem. And this goes to the point of that dual role, because other companies also face principal-agent problem. It's not very unique to SOE, but the way it manifests in the SOE is different to a private sector company. When we were doing the diagnostic, someone mentioned this, and I think put it more eloquently than I could have. The person said that we have multiple masters. And that's the challenge that they have to manage, the SOE leadership. And especially in Indonesia, if I can say that more candidly, where you have it's not a centralized ownership structure because many of the SOE's assets are ultimately owned by the Ministry of Finance. Then you have Ministry of SOE that is overseeing those assets. And then you have technical line ministries that have say or influence over what an SOE does in a particular sector. And many of the developing countries would be probably put in that spectrum of falling on either side of where Indonesia stands. This issue, I think, goes at the heart of performance and evaluation, because if you don't address that ownership issue at the top, at the apex, what cascades down is not clear instruction. So no matter how skillful SOE managers you are able to put in, if they are having multiple masters to answer, it's very difficult for them to do the jobs that they are entrusted to do. Second thing that I wanted to highlight from our study, what we found out was that in Indonesia's case, SOEs that are listed tend to perform better than SOEs that are not. And again, this was a quantitative analysis that we did. We qualitatively then interviewed many of these SOEs, and what we found very interestingly and intuitively is that the SOEs that are listed have a higher degree of reporting requirements. And this goes to the point that Ibu Nelly so eloquently mentioned. Many of the SOEs, particularly in the banking sector, are subjected to very higher standards of regulations and reporting requirements. But SOEs across different sectors are then, what we see is working in a patchwork of reporting requirements. How do you standardize that across the sectors becomes a key issue. I will not, maybe just to wrap up the points that I wanted to raise, I think what needs to be done in terms of performance evaluation is well established in OECD's guideline, clearer indicators, clearer performance targets, well communicated to the board of directors and so forth. In Indonesia's case, as we are working with you on the reform measures, we're very, very pleased to note that the selection criteria for the board has improved. So it's not just translating in terms of what we are seeing in the board, but also you have these well-established or clearer criteria. We also know that you have established the SOE Leadership Management Institute, which is key to developing the capacity. We are also quite pleased to know that you've established the SOE onboarding program. Again, when an SOE director moves from one sector to another sector, he or she might be skillful as an accountant, lawyer, economist, or what have you, but sectoral differences might still be new to him or her. So this is quite important. And also the centralized SOE talent pool. One last point, if you allow me to say, I think what we should not miss is, going back to my earlier point, the apex body needs to be strengthened. And if I may say so, many of these reform measures are being led by the revamping of the Ministry of SOE that we've seen over the last few years. And that is paramount for sustaining many of these issues that we want to be seen in a particular SOE. If the head does not have the capacity, it'll be very difficult for the rest of the body to follow. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Yurendra. Thank you. That's very insightful and good to know that basically what we're doing is on the right track. Now, going to the last questions about climates now. Given the limited time, maybe I just ask each of you to give your answers short and concise, right? I'd like to ask you about climate change. Now, for Matilda, I'd like to know, from the experience of OECD on climate change and sustainable development, working in this number of countries, how do you see the main challenges and obstacles, right?
Maybe I will answer on the priorities for that. And if you want me to answer very quickly, because we need to wrap up, I think there are two things that need to be done. It's to integrate climate goals into the ownership policy, so at the overall portfolio level. And then, just like for private investors, make sure that the SOEs individually have climate-related goals, and that they insert these goals in their long-term investment strategies. That would be the two priorities.
Okay. Now, Bu Nelly, what has the ministry been doing to promote this climate change?
So ESG responsibilities, I'll be very quick as well here. So ESG, I can split it into two segments. One segment is around really addressing ESG issues, yeah, and we install this through our SOE, through our planning process. So we install ESG targets for our boards, and that's part of the contract management that they have to sign. We assign, this is ESG, you want higher weight. And we actually even assign which one is E, S, and G, and you have to sort of like have a balance, ESG components, yeah? So that's what we do on the enforcement of setting the guidance for the SOE to address this more seriously by installing it in our tool, which is the commitment and contract management. Now, on the other side, on the disclosure side, we're doing two things at the same time right now. We're forming, like I said at the beginning, our SOEs, some of them comply to OJK, some of them outside of the scope of OJK. OJK has OJK number 51, 2017 or 2018, I forgot. It talks about minimum standard of ESG reporting. So from our SOE side, we want to establish a committee that will develop what disclosure standards that needs to be developed by the SOE, and we'll start with OJK's basic requirements and upgrade it based on cluster. Once that the individual SOEs start to comply, then we can start at the portfolio level, we can start to consolidate. So it's a two-step work, and again, we're being helped by our Association of Auditor, EAI, as well as our colleagues from KFW, who are helping us understand what exactly is required by lenders in terms of ESG disclosure, what exactly is required by the ISSB in terms of disclosure, and what is required by other stakeholders in terms of ESG disclosure. So we're at the beginning of this process, but this is in parallel to the G components of it. Yeah.
Thank you. No, Yurendra, from your diagnostic assessments, anything you can add about climate change and climate issues that the government, especially Minister of SOE, currently is doing that you think will exemplify it the best?
Sure. Thank you so much. I think for me, again, looking at Indonesia, since we are here, I just wanted to actually pose a question by saying $600 billion in assets, right? 620. Imagine if $620 billion asset were to move in a climate compatible way, right? That's a huge tanker. That's 52% of Indonesia's economy. So the gains are, it can be a game changer in terms of SOEs if it starts moving in that direction, and it could lead with it the rest of the market in each of the sector. The question is how, and I guess that's your the question. Also, you would. So some of the things that Ibu Nelly mentioned, I think, are critical on the risk side, on the disclosure side, because that is getting SOEs ready to face some of the regulatory movement that is taking place. The second thing I would like to say or highlight is what Pak Tiko mentioned in his presentation on business innovation. So I think that's the second part which needs to accompany the monitoring and the regulation, is the investment decision that SOEs are making. Indonesia has a very interesting case, as many of the audience here would already know, with Pertamina investing in power and renewable energy. We see that in some of the European countries as well. So that sort of transition to more climate compatible business would be the direction to go. I think at the same time, what is missing, what we find at least missing in the discussion, you have very high level, at the high level, you have the country goal, and then you have SOEs or companies sort of operating at the sector. There is a missing middle that translates or trickles down or cascades what's achievable in which sector by when. And that sort of policy analysis, I think, needs to come in quickly. And we know that in Indonesia, you are doing the baselining, you are looking at the abatement costs to understand what are the policy implications. So I think that probably is something that could be shared with other jurisdictions as well.
Thank you, Rendra. Thank you so much. With that, I think we can conclude the last session. I hope this awakened all of you, but we know for sure that I think SOE reform is about institutional reform at the end of the day. Governance and climate are two issues that are always going to be faced by SOE in the reform agenda. With that, thank you so much. Enjoy Bali, get some tan, go to the beaches, and be relaxed because your session is over. Thank you.
Thank you very much for, indeed, it was an interesting third and final discussion. Kindly return to your seats in the floor. Thank you. Excellencies, distinguished speakers, ladies and gentlemen, this afternoon, 3 topics have been discussed by eminent speakers from various institutions, and they will be the source of what's next in the review of G20 OECD corporate governance principles. We now officially conclude this forum with the closing session. First, we would like to invite to the stage to deliver his closing remarks. Please welcome Deputy Secretary General of OECD, Mr. Yoshiki Takeuchi.
Well, thank you very much. I think we had a great day. I've been listening to the whole sessions, and I was very much impressed with lots of things that has been discussed. And first of all, I would like to start by echoing our Secretary General, Matthias Koman, saying that thanking the Indonesian G20 presidency and the Indonesia's financial services authorities for their partnership in organizing this corporate governance forum. And as has been mentioned, this forum took place at an important juncture in the OECD and G20's collaboration to revise the G20 OECD principles for corporate governance. Today's discussion have raised important issues for our work on updating the principles and ensuring that the corporate sector plays a positive role in contributing to a resilient recovery and a sustainable future. I would therefore like to thank all the panelists and the moderators who joined us today for their insights on these issues. The development and implementation of international standards such as the G20 OECD principles of corporate governance is one of the major tools by which shared values are given meaning and promoted around the world. In this regard, the review of the principles as the major international standard for corporate governance holds great importance. The OECD also attaches particular importance to the review of the principles as a joint G20 OECD instrument. OECD alone can do so, but with joint G20 OECD instrument, we can do a lot. Our partnership with the G20 on the corporate governance and in many other areas ensures that OECD work reflects experiences and considerations of major economies beyond our membership. It also contributes to a widely accepted set of common rules for an open and market-based global economy. Coming back to the corporate governance principle, it is critical that the revised principles contribute to fostering vibrant capital markets and improve companies' access to finance from markets to support a sustainable and resilient recovery. Today's discussion on sustainability and resilience are a reflection of the strong interest of all OECD and G20 members. There is also a shared expectation that the revised principles provide guidance in improving the company's management of ESG risks and notably climate risks to support the transition to net zero. Finally, today's discussion on state-owned enterprises, I think it was quite interesting and taught me a lot. I was impressed with this great attempts by the SOEs to have a common standards around the world. So I think since we have this instrument, OECD guidelines on corporate governance of state-owned enterprises, I think OECD can do more and more to cooperate with the state-owned ownership. So, ladies and gentlemen, the review of the principles comes at the critical moments as our members strive to overcome the scarring effects of the COVID-19 pandemic and other major disruptions in our economies. G20 and OECD members should therefore aim to be ambitious in this review and fully embrace the opportunity to ensure the revised principles that supports a sustainable and resilient corporate sector. Thank you again for this opportunity to address this forum, and thank you again for me being able to be present at this forum. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Takeuchi, for the closing remarks. Finally, now the closing remarks by Chief Executive of Capital Market Supervisor, concurrently member of the Board of the Commissioners, Indonesia Financial Services Authority. Please welcome Bapak Husin.
Distinguished guests, Mr. Takeuchi, and all of the participants and all of the representatives from OECD, especially members of G20 and also speakers, especially and moderators, esteemed colleagues, participants, ladies and gentlemen. Assalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. Good afternoon. May peace be upon us all. Om Swastiastu. Namo Buddhaya, salam kebajikan. Greeting of virtue. First and foremost, I would like to express my highest appreciation to our distinguished speakers and participants of today's G20 OECD Corporate Governance Forum. Thank you for a very insightful and engaging discussion throughout the event. The COVID-19 crisis has highlighted significant shift in global capital markets, including the declining numbers of listed companies and the lower numbers of growth companies accessing public markets. But the pandemic has also spawned digitalization within financial market practices, driving changes in behavior that can strengthen the quality and resilience in recovering from the COVID-19 crisis. One of the challenging that may compromise the corporate resilience is the rise of the new risks that come, including environmental, social, and governance risks. By adhering this risk, companies can have better access to the equity that supports green and digital transitions, which are essential for long-term resilience. State-owned enterprise have a significant role in driving sustainable and inclusive development in Indonesia. SOE covers many sectors, as Pak Vice Minister mentions, from energy and water to services and infrastructure. Due to the SOE's broad reach, they are expected to stay updated with the current development while maintaining financial sustainability. Hence, it is vital to ensure that they conduct good corporate governance to minimize inefficiency and provide more reliable public services. Ladies and gentlemen, it was an excellent time learning about the role of the corporate governance in developing resilience recovery and sustainable growth from our distinguished speakers' expertise and experiences. We have noticed that some critical highlights, such as the COVID-19 crisis, trigger a shift in capital market, generating new risks and opportunities. Better corporate governance, particularly in SOEs, will not only smoothen the economic recovery process, but also support a more resilient growth. Digitalization is a powerful and essential tool to enhance the quality of corporate governance. We realize that digital transformation is inevitable to keep the financial sectors abreast with future challenges. We believe that digitalization can improve the overall quality of corporate governance, hence attaching more opportunities for long-term investment. The G20 OECD principle of corporate governance has also been reviewed with the key finding that recognize the need to adapt corporate governance law and practices to the post-COVID-19 environment, including climate change and other ESG rules, changes in corporate ownership, digitalization, and capital market developments. In line with the review of G20 OECD Principle Corporate Governance, OJK has already developed a careful approach to developing supervisory technology, or we call it a SupTech, and regulatory technology, or RegTech, as part to enhance the reporting system and compliance processes. In addition, OJK has also launched what we call it the electronic general shareholder meetings rule that can provide proxy and voting rights through online platform and issued several regulators or policies relating corporate governance and sustainability finance, such as sustainability report, green bond, and Indonesian green taxonomy that adopted from G20 OECD principles. Furthermore, we also ensure the soundness of corporate governance through coordination with our institutional partners. Ladies and gentlemen, this forum held as part of the Indonesian G20 presidency side events, where Indonesia is ready to continue the important work in facilitating global efforts and collaboration to recover together and recover stronger. We hope that our event today will strengthen our collaboration in accelerating the economy, recover and growth that the regional and the global level. We would like to welcome you again for the following Road to Indonesia G20 Summit events to have more discussion and on addressing challenges our issues such as economic recovery, sustainable finance, and digital financial inclusion. On behalf of my OJK colleague, I would like to extend my sincere appreciation to all speakers and participants. Our deepest gratitude also goes to our esteemed collaborating partners, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of State-Owned Enterprises, Indonesian Stock Exchange, and OECD, of course. For those of you joining us right here in Bali, I hope you could spend more time to enjoy the nature and culture of this beautiful island and bring back good memories to your home country. Thank you very much. Wassalamualaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.
Thank you. Thank you, Bapak Hosin, for the closing remarks. And that concludes our event today. We are deeply honored to have all representatives to share their views in this G20 OECD Corporate Governance Forum today on the 14th of July in Nusa Dua, Bali. We would like to extend our gratitude once again to you all for your kind support, and thanks to you who are joining virtually. As a final remarks, to you who are joining here physically, please be reminded to join us tonight for a warm hospitality in the welcome dinner, once again at Geraha Paruman Ballroom at Hilton Bali Resort. The dinner will start at 7:30 p.m. The dress code is business casual. And don't forget to wear your official name badge. Transportation will be ready from 6:15 p.m. at the lobby of Westin Resort. Once again, 6:15 p.m. Transportation will take you to the dinner venue at the lobby of Westin Resort. Once again, on behalf of the organizing committee, I'm Nirmala Trisna. Thank you very much. We cannot wait to see you tonight. Terima kasih.